Hey there, tonight we're diving into how Roman slaves survived brutal conditions. What you're about to discover is the resilience hidden beneath the empire's marble facade. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in. Maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You find yourself in the bustling heart of ancient Rome, but don't get too comfortable. This isn't the Rome of glamorous toga parties and philosophical debates under the stars. Nope, we're going straight to the gritty underbelly, the world of Roman slaves. Forget the romanticized images of chiseled gladiators and noble servants from Hollywood. This is where the real stories live. Slaves, or servi, as they were known, made up about a third of the population in Rome. That's like if every third person you saw on the street today was in chains. We're talking mind-boggling numbers, around 8 to 10 million people across the Roman Empire. Why so many? Well, the Romans weren't exactly shy about taking people captive. Conquest was their jam, and they were pretty good at it. War captives from places like Gaul, Spain, and the Greek territories were shipped in like commodities, and surprise, they were treated like them too. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the slave market. This wasn't some quaint little affair. Picture a bustling marketplace, but instead of fruits and spices, it's human beings on display. A healthy male slave could fetch up to 2,000 denarii, which is roughly the price of a decent car today. Sure, you could get an older or less skilled worker for cheaper, but if you wanted someone who could till the fields or fight in the arena, you'd better be ready to splash some serious cash. And what about those myths of upward mobility and freedom for slaves? Sure, some slaves could earn their freedom through hard work, but let's be real. This was more of a fairy tale than a common reality. For most, life was brutal, short, and devoid of rights. If you were a slave, you were property, plain and simple. Your master could sell you, beat you, or even kill you without a second thought. The law was not your friend. It's easy to get caught up in the romanticized notion of a benevolent master-slave relationship, but the truth is far darker. A Roman historian named Seneca once wrote that slaves should be treated kindly, but he was the exception, not the rule. Masters were often cruel, seeing slaves as nothing more than tools for profit or pleasure. But how did slaves cope with these brutal conditions? Resilience was key. Many formed tight-knit communities, relying on each other for support and the small joys that broke the monotony of their harsh existence. Music, stories, and shared traditions kept their spirits alive even when their bodies were broken by labor. The truth is, the Roman economy thrived on the backs of slaves. They were the ones who built the aqueducts, toiled in the fields, and served in the villas of the wealthy. Their labor was the foundation of Rome's grandeur, yet their contributions were largely erased from the history books. While we often celebrate the achievements of Roman generals and statesmen, it's the untold stories of these slaves that remind us of the real cost of empire. So as you wander through the streets of ancient Rome, pause for a moment. Imagine the stories of those who walked these paths in shackles. The echoes of their struggles and endurance are the hidden soundtrack to the city's glory. In the end, it's not just the marble statues and grand temples that stand as legacies of the Roman Empire, but also the resilience of those who survived its harshest realities. You can almost hear the clamor of chains and the dull roar of 1,000 different tongues as you wander through ancient Rome. But now, let's dive deeper into the daily grind of those who kept the wheels of this mighty empire turning, its slaves. Forget any notions of leisurely afternoons. For many, life was a relentless cycle of toil and survival, with a few stolen moments of camaraderie. Start with the household slaves, the familia urbana. Picture a well-off Roman villa where the day kicks off before dawn. The kitchen slaves, or carquis, are already up, wrestling with primitive stoves to whip up a breakfast worthy of their master's palate. And you thought your morning coffee rush was stressful, but it wasn't just about cooking. There were floors to scrub, children to mind, and heaven forbid, toga stains to remove. Now that's a laundry day nightmare. In the countryside, things took a turn for the more physically demanding. Agricultural slaves, or familia rustica, were up with the birds quite literally. They tilled the fields, harvested crops, and tended to livestock, all under the watchful eye of a slave overseer. The Romans were big on wheat, so much so that they had a law requiring cities to maintain a 30-day supply of grain. Guess who made that possible? Hint, it wasn't the patricians lounging in the Senate. Then there were the unfortunate souls doomed to the mines. If you thought your commute was rough, try descending into a claustrophobic pit every morning. Gold, silver, lead, whatever the empire craved, they dug for it. Ancient sources, like Pliny the Elder, tell us that miners worked in conditions so brutal that many didn't last a year. Not exactly a career with a retirement plan. Yet, amidst the back-breaking labor, slaves found ways to cope. Social networks were their lifeline. Think of it as a primordial LinkedIn, but with less networking and more life-or-death stakes. Bonds formed between slaves could mean the difference between survival and despair. They shared food, stories, and the occasional triumphs, forging connections that transcended their chains. Some slaves even managed to play the long game for freedom, a process known as manumission. If you were exceptionally skilled or lucky, you might earn your way out of bondage. Not to be too optimistic, though freedom was a rare prize. But it did happen, enough to keep hope alive. The Roman legal system had provisions for slaves to buy their freedom, often after years of saving up peculium, a kind of pocket money. Now, about those career prospects. The grim reality is that slaves had as much chance of a promotion as a snowball in the Sahara. Sure, a few rose through the ranks to become trusted household managers or even advisors, but let's not kid ourselves. This was the exception, not the rule. For most, the only way out was through, with back-breaking work as the daily constant. But wait, there's a twist. In this world of relentless labor, some slaves became indispensable to their masters. Doctors, teachers, and skilled artisans were often slaves, and their expertise sometimes earned them a measure of respect. Of course, respect here means slightly better treatment, not a seat at the table. Still, it was something to cling to. Amidst all this, let's not forget entertainment. Slaves weren't just labor, they were performers too. Gladiators, although a small percentage of the slave population, were the rock stars of their day. Trained to fight in arenas like the Colosseum, they could win fame, fortune, and occasionally their freedom. But let's not romanticize it. Most gladiators faced a gruesome end. As we sift through the layers of history, the resilience of these enslaved people stands out. They were the backbone of an empire that often failed to acknowledge their humanity. And while their stories are often overshadowed by tales of emperors and generals, it's their endurance that truly echoes through time. So, next time you hear the phrase, when in Rome, remember the countless slaves who made the grandeur possible. They navigated a world of unimaginable hardship with a tenacity that still inspires. And though they may not have left grand monuments or epic poems, their legacy is etched in the very fabric of Roman history. Stay tuned, because the saga of survival and resilience continues, and trust me, you won't want to miss the next chapter. The saga of survival and resilience continues, taking us into the shadowy realm of the Roman psyche, where power dynamics were less about physical chains and more about the mental shackles that weighed heavy on the soul. Picture this, a society where fear was the currency and paranoia was a perennial crop. Roman masters had a psychological playbook that would make Machiavelli proud. And it was all about keeping the slaves one step away from rebellion and 2 steps into submission. First up on the docket is the old reliable, fear. Fear was the Romans' favorite tool to keep their slaves in line. Why bother with constant supervision when a few strategic executions could send the message loud and clear? Tacitus, that charming chronicler of all things grim, described how slaves who murdered their masters were executed en masse, even if only one had wielded the knife. The logic. Make sure everyone feels the heat, and maybe they'll think twice before sharpening their own blades. This policy wasn't just about punishment. It was a deliberate strategy to instill a communal sense of dread. But fear wasn't the only arrow in their quiver. There was also the fine art of manipulation. Divide and conquer wasn't just for armies. It was a household affair. Masters turned slaves against one another, promoting snitches and spies from within the ranks. This wasn't just a matter of gaining intel. It was about sowing distrust, ensuring that unity, a prelude to rebellion, was perpetually out of reach. A slave with a taste for gossip could find themselves in a slightly better position, though still 1,000 leagues from freedom. Yet where there's oppression, there's resistance, and Roman slaves had their own toolkit of defiance. Forget the bold, cinematic slave uprisings for a moment. The real intrigue lies in the subtleties. Take work slowdowns, for instance, a classic move. By dragging their feet, slaves could sabotage productivity without outright rebellion. Think of it as passive resistance, ancient style. And if you thought workplace sabotage was a modern invention, think again. Deliberate damage to tools or crops was a risky but potent way to remind masters that their control was far from absolute. For those who dared to dream bigger, there was Spartacus, the poster child for rebellion who turned his chains into a rallying cry. The year was 73 BCE, and Spartacus, a Thracian gladiator, decided he'd had enough of the arena's blood-soaked sands. Along with 70 fellow gladiators, he broke free from a gladiatorial school in Capua, wielding kitchen knives and sheer audacity. What started as a desperate bid for freedom morphed into a full-scale revolt that saw thousands of slaves rise up, carving a path through the Italian countryside. Spartacus' rebellion wasn't just a storm-the-castle affair. It was more strategic than you might think. His forces swelled to over 70,000, a testament to both his charisma and the deep-seated discontent simmering across the Roman provinces. For nearly 2 years, his army of former slaves and disaffected peasants gave Rome a serious run for its money, a thorn in the side of the Republic. But let's not sugarcoat it. While Spartacus' story is often romanticized, the reality was brutal. His rebellion was marked by fierce battles and devastating losses. In the end, Spartacus' forces were crushed by the Roman legions, and his defeat was less a heroic last stand and more a sobering reminder of the might of the Roman military machine. Yet, Spartacus' legacy isn't just in the rebellion's failure. It's in the audacity of its ambition. He showed the world that even the most downtrodden could rise up, that the chains of slavery could be shattered, even if only temporarily. His story has echoed through history, inspiring countless tales of resistance, even if the Romans ensured the rebels met a grisly end. Some 6,000 were crucified along the Appian Way as a grim reminder to any would-be Spartacuses of the future. And so, the cycle continued. For every act of rebellion, there was a countermeasure, a fresh wave of repression. Yet these stories of defiance, both grand and subtle, remind us that the human spirit, even when crushed under the weight of oppression, has a remarkable way of finding cracks in the walls of tyranny. As we've seen, the methods of control were as varied as they were brutal, but the slaves' responses were equally diverse, each a testament to their enduring resilience. Stay tuned, because we're far from done exploring this ancient world where power and resistance danced a deadly tango, and the echoes of those battles still resonate through time. As we plunge deeper into the Roman psyche, let's peel back the layers of an economic juggernaut that would make Wall Street blush. Slavery wasn't just a cog in the Roman machine. It was the engine driving the entire apparatus. You're not just talking about a few people here and there doing odd jobs. We're talking about an institution that was the lifeblood of Rome's economy, an economy so dependent on cheap labor that it would make today's sweatshops look like day spas. First, let's talk numbers. At the height of the Roman Empire, slaves made up a staggering 30 to 40% of the population in Italy. That's around 3 to 4 million people, folks. Imagine if every other person you passed on the street was there to ensure the gears of the economic leviathan stayed greased. And it wasn't just about numbers. It was about utility. These souls were the invisible architects of Rome's grandeur, working in agriculture, mining, construction, and even the arts. If there was a job to be done, chances are a slave was doing it. Now, let's set the stage with agriculture because, let's face it, Rome was built on grain. Wheat was to the Romans what oil is to our modern world. Essential. The annona, or grain dole, was a staple of Roman society, ensuring that citizens in Rome never went hungry, at least not the ones who mattered. This wasn't a generous welfare program. It was a calculated move to keep the masses from revolting. And guess who was breaking their backs to make sure those granaries were full? That's right, the slaves. They were the uncelebrated heroes of the Roman breadbasket. From the fertile plains of Sicily to the sun-drenched fields of North Africa, slaves were the muscle behind Rome's agricultural might. Their sweat and toil ensured that the empire's cities thrived. Without them, the Roman elite wouldn't have their daily bread or their wine-soaked feasts. The gap between the rich and the poor, You could park a chariot in it. While the patricians lounged in luxury, the plebeians and slaves toiled away, each day blurring into the next. And then there's the construction. If you've ever marveled at the Colosseum or the aqueducts, remember this. Those stones didn't move themselves. Hundreds of thousands of slaves worked in grueling conditions to build the architectural wonders that still draw tourists today. Imagine lifting massive stone blocks all day under the scorching sun, only to collapse into a fitful sleep at night, knowing tomorrow would be more of the same. Marble, concrete, brick. These were the materials of empire, and slaves were the hands that shaped them. Mining, too, was a crucial industry, and it was nothing short of a death sentence. Imagine descending into the bowels of the earth, armed with little more than a pickaxe and hope. Silver from the mines of Spain, gold from Dacia. These were the treasures that filled Roman coffers, financing everything from military campaigns to the infamous gladiatorial games. And every ounce of metal was extracted with the blood and sweat of slaves who rarely saw the light of day again. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? Surely these slaves had some upward mobility. Well, not so fast. While manumission was a thing, it was the exception rather than the rule. The promise of freedom was a carrot dangled in front of the enslaved to encourage loyalty and hard work. In reality, it was a tantalizing dream that very few realized. The lucky ones who did manage to buy their freedom didn't exactly leap into prosperity. Freedmen often found themselves in a precarious social position, straddling the line between the world of the free and the chains they'd left behind. And let's not forget the role of slavery in the rise and fall of the Roman Republic and Empire. Slavery was both a symptom and a cause of Rome's insatiable appetite for conquest. As the empire expanded, so did its need for slaves. More land meant more labor was required to extract its wealth. But as the empire reached its zenith, the system began to crack under its own weight. The reliance on slavery created a society where the rich grew richer, and the poor, well, they stayed poor. The increasing wealth gap fueled social unrest, contributing to the eventual decline of the Roman Empire. Economically speaking, the reliance on slave labor stifled innovation. Why invent new technologies or methods when you have an endless supply of human labor? This short-sightedness eventually cost Rome dearly. As the empire faced external pressures and internal strife, its economy faltered. The labor force that once powered Rome's economy became a burden when the empire could no longer sustain its conquests. So, when you hear tales of Roman glory and grandeur, remember the cold, hard realities that fueled it. The economic engine of Roman slavery was both a marvel and a monstrosity. It built an empire, yes, but it was also the chains that ultimately dragged it down. The very foundation of Roman society was built on the backs of slaves, a fact often glossed over in tales of heroic generals and wise emperors. The legacy of Roman slavery is a reminder of the cost of empire, a cost measured not just in coins and conquests, but in human lives. It's a stark lesson in the dangers of unchecked power and the price of progress. As we continue to explore the intricacies of this ancient world, remember that behind every triumph was a tale of toil, and behind every victory, a story of survival. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more revelations about the empire's rise and fall. And believe me, you won't want to miss it. As the dust settles over the remnants of the Roman Empire, let's take a step back and assess the long shadow that Roman slavery cast over history. Ever heard the saying, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes? Well, the echoes of Roman slavery have been reverberating through the centuries, and they're not just a faint whisper, they're a full-blown chorus. First, let's talk about the economic legacy. The Roman economy was an ancient juggernaut, fueled by a reliance on slave labor that left a blueprint of exploitation for future empires. The concept of cheap labor as the backbone of wealth didn't die with Rome. Fast forward to the colonial era, and you'll see a familiar pattern: conquest, subjugation, and the exploitation of labor. The British, Spanish, and Portuguese empires, to name a few, took pages right out of Rome's playbook. The transatlantic slave trade was a brutal echo of Roman practices, where human lives were commodified and traded like livestock. It's a chilling reminder that the allure of cheap labor has always been too tempting for empires to resist. Roman slavery also left its mark on social structures. The stark divide between the elite and the laborers became a template for future societies. The class hierarchies seen in medieval Europe, with serfs tied to the land and nobles living in opulence, bear a striking resemblance to the Roman divide between patricians and slaves. Even today's socio-economic disparities can trace their roots back to these ancient systems of inequality. And while the faces of oppression have changed, the mechanisms, fear, manipulation, and economic dependency remain eerily similar. Now, let's not forget the psychological legacy. The Romans perfected the art of control through fear and division, a tactic that's been recycled throughout history. Whether it's the plantation owners in the antebellum South or the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century, the strategy of keeping people divided and fearful has proven remarkably effective. The Roman practice of rewarding informants and creating internal hierarchies among slaves is a timeless tactic for maintaining power. It's a reminder that while the methods of domination may evolve, the human desire for control remains constant. But here's the twist. The legacy of Roman slavery isn't just about exploitation and control. It's also about resistance and resilience. The stories of defiance, from Spartacus' rebellion to the subtle acts of sabotage, have inspired countless movements throughout history. The Haitian Revolution, the abolitionist movement, and the fight for civil rights all echo the spirit of resistance that thrived even in the darkest corners of Roman history. The idea that the oppressed could rise up, that they could challenge the status quo, has been a rallying cry for the downtrodden throughout the ages. Even in popular culture, the legacy of Roman slavery has left a mark. The image of the gladiator, fighting for freedom and glory, has become a symbol of resilience and courage. From the silver screen epics of Hollywood to the pages of novels, the romanticized versions of these stories continue to captivate us. Yet, it's essential to remember the harsh realities behind these legends. While the tales of gladiators and rebels make for thrilling narratives, the truth is far grimmer. Most gladiators met bloody ends, and many rebellions were crushed with brutal efficiency. But the allure of these stories endures, reminding us of the eternal struggle between oppression and freedom. The legal systems of the world, too, have been shaped by Roman precedents. Roman law, with its detailed regulations of slavery, laid the groundwork for legal systems that would come to govern vast swaths of the world. The concept of people as property was enshrined in legal codes, influencing everything from European colonial laws to American slave codes. It's a sobering reminder of how deeply entrenched the notion of human commodification has been in our history. So, as we wrap up our journey through the world of Roman slavery, what can we take away from all this? The legacy of Roman slavery is a multifaceted one, a tapestry woven with threads of exploitation, resistance, and resilience. It's a story that reminds us of the cost of empire and the enduring human spirit that refuses to be broken. While the empires of old may have crumbled, their echoes continue to shape our world. The lessons of Roman slavery are as relevant today as they were 2 millennia ago, a testament to the enduring complexities of power, freedom, and humanity. In the end, the saga of Roman slavery is not just a chapter in a history book. It's a mirror reflecting the best and worst of human nature. It's a reminder that while we may be fascinated by the grandeur of ancient Rome, we must also confront the grim realities that underpinned its success. The stories of those who lived and died in chains are not just relics of the past. They're a call to action for a more just and equitable future. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it, or at least rhyme with it. So, here's to learning from history, not just admiring it. After all, the past might be behind us, but its lessons are always at our feet. On a lazy afternoon around 3200 BCE, some ancient Egyptian probably looked at the mess of symbols they'd etched into wet sand and thought, there's got to be a better way. Fast forward a few centuries, and voila, we have hieroglyphs, the writing system that's part word puzzle, part art exhibit. These early Egyptians didn't just scribble for fun. They were laying down the foundation for a civilization that would last over 3,000 years. And they did it by turning their language into a series of elaborate characters that are about as easy to decode as a modern teen's text messages. Back in the day, these hieroglyphs weren't just for decoration. They were the backbone of religious practices and administrative management. In a society where the gods were as much a part of daily life as the Nile River, the Egyptians needed a way to communicate with the divine that was a bit more sophisticated than shouting into the void. So, they picked up their chisels and started carving symbols onto temple walls and tombs, presumably because papyrus scrolls weren't dramatic enough for these celestial conversations. Now, why on earth would they choose a system that looks like it requires an art degree to decipher? Well, because they didn't just want to write words. They wanted to capture the essence of the things they were writing about. A duck wasn't just a duck. It was the representation of the sound, sa. These symbols served as both phonetic components and ideograms, a 2-for-1 deal that made sure their messages were as clear as mud to anyone who wasn't in the know. But it wasn't all about impressing the guards. Hieroglyphs were also crucial for keeping the wheels of Egyptian bureaucracy turning. The pharaohs needed a way to keep track of all those grain harvests, taxes, and grandiose building projects. You know, the important stuff. Imagine trying to run an empire that stretches over 386,000 square miles without a little help from a complex system of written records. Spoiler alert, it wouldn't work. So the scribes, who were probably the rock stars of ancient admin, used hieroglyphs to document everything from the mundane to the monumental. Of course, there's a certain romantic charm to the idea of hieroglyphs as a mystical language, but the reality was a lot more practical. These symbols were tools, not just mystical runes left behind by a lost civilization. They were the ancient equivalent of spreadsheets, albeit ones that look a lot cooler on a stone slab than your average Excel file. So, while the allure of hieroglyphs might lie in their mysterious beauty, their true significance was in their functionality. The origins of hieroglyphs are a testament to the Egyptian knack for combining art with utility. In a world where survival depended on organization and communication, they didn't just adapt, they thrived. By transforming their language into an intricate tapestry of symbols, they ensured that their culture would endure long after the sands of time had covered their cities. And while hieroglyphs might seem like an enigma wrapped in a riddle today, for the ancient Egyptians, they were simply the language of life. So, let's jump back into the world of hieroglyphs, where complexity was the name of the game and simplicity was, quite frankly, a foreign concept. Picture this, over 700 symbols to remember. Yes, more than 700. And these weren't just your average A, B, C, S. No, these were intricately designed characters, each with its own personality, like a cast of characters in an ancient soap opera. It's no wonder scribes were the ancient equivalent of today's overworked data entry clerks, squinting at stone tablets instead of computer screens. Scribes were the unsung heroes of ancient Egypt. These folks were the glue that held the administrative machinery together, ensuring the pharaoh's dreams of grandeur were meticulously documented. It's like having to type out war and peace with emojis and then having someone tell you, "Oh, by the way, you can never make a mistake. Ever. No pressure, right?" In reality, the life of a scribe was a bit less glamorous than the romanticized notion of a wise sage hunched over a scroll. They were, in essence, the ancient world's cubicle warriors, armed with reed pens and a stack of papyrus. Now, speaking of papyrus, let's talk about the economics of this ancient writing system. Papyrus was the gold standard long before Bitcoin made digital currency cool. Imagine trying to write out your grocery list on a slab of stone. Sounds exhausting, doesn't it? Enter papyrus. Lightweight, portable, and the ancient world's answer to the iPad. But this convenience came at a cost. Papyrus was so valuable that it was often reused, with scribes scraping off old ink to write new messages. A single sheet could set you back more than a few copper deben, the currency of choice back in the day. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of buying printer ink for your office. Expensive, but you can't function without it. The economy of hieroglyphs wasn't just about the materials, though. It was about the power dynamics. Because let's face it, whoever controlled the writing, controlled the narrative. The ability to document and archive made scribes powerful players in the Egyptian hierarchy. Their work didn't just keep the economy ticking. It was essential in preserving the pharaoh's legacies and the state's history. In a way, they were the original influencers, shaping how future generations would perceive their world. But let's not get too misty-eyed over the romantic notion of scribes as the keepers of wisdom. The reality was much more of a grind. These scribes were often trained from a young age. spending years learning the dizzying complexities of hieroglyphic writing. It was a bit like getting a PhD in ancient logistics. Upon mastering their craft, they were thrust into a career that demanded precision and offered little room for error. Imagine being responsible for drafting a royal decree and accidentally mixing up a symbol or two. You wouldn't just be in hot water, you'd be in the Nile with concrete sandals. Hieroglyphs were not just a form of art, they were a functional necessity. And while the symbols might look like hieratic doodles to us now, they were the backbone of a sophisticated communication system that kept a sprawling empire united. The Egyptians understood that the pen, or in their case, the chisel, was mightier than the sword. And while we might romanticize the beauty of the hieroglyphic script, its true power lay in its ability to convey precise information across time and space. So, next time you're grumbling about the sheer number of passwords you have to remember, spare a thought for the scribes of ancient Egypt. They didn't just have to remember hundreds of symbols. They had to make them come alive on the walls of tombs and the pages of papyrus scrolls. Their work was the stuff of legend, but it was grounded in the gritty reality of daily toil. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of hieroglyphs, we're not just piecing together the history of a civilization. We're uncovering the stories of the people who made it all possible. Stay tuned, because we're just getting started on this journey through the world of hieroglyphs. There's more to uncover about the lives of scribes and the incredible legacy they left behind. So, buckle up, because the story of ancient Egypt is like the Nile itself, winding, full of surprises, and always flowing. So, as we dive deeper into the labyrinthine world of hieroglyphs, let's shine a light on how these symbols became the playthings of politics during Egypt's Old and Middle Kingdoms. Picture this era as a kind of ancient political theater, where the pharaohs weren't just rulers. They were practically directors of their own epic productions, with hieroglyphs as the script. These kings and queens of the Nile didn't just slap symbols on walls for giggles. No, they used hieroglyphs like a megaphone, proclaiming their divine right to rule and reminding everyone that they were, quite literally, the gods' gift to earth. The Old Kingdom, often dubbed the Age of the Pyramids, was also the age of the hieroglyphic boom. Around 2700 to 2200 BCE, pharaohs like Djoser and Khufu weren't just building architectural wonders. They were crafting a legacy in stone. And what better way to ensure your legacy than to literally write it in stone? These pharaohs commissioned hieroglyphs that told the world, or at least anyone who wandered into the desert, about their divine lineage and supernatural powers. It was like their version of social media, but instead of likes and shares, they went for the more timeless approach: immortality. Now, let's talk about the Middle Kingdom, circa 2050 to 1710 BCE, a time when the pharaohs decided that their PR game needed an upgrade. Sure, they kept the whole divine right shtick, but they also started using hieroglyphs to build more personal connections with their subjects. It was the birth of the relatable ruler, if you will. Pharaohs like Senusret Roman III were essentially saying, "Look, I'm a god, sure, but I'm also just like you." They didn't go so far as to host town hall meetings, but they did use hieroglyphs to document laws and decrees, making the written word an essential tool in governing the masses. Speaking of the masses, let's not get too carried away with the idea that hieroglyphs were a tool of the people. Because here's the kicker: the vast majority of Egyptians didn't have a clue how to read them. These symbols were like an exclusive club, and only a select few, the scribes, priests, and nobles, held the key. So, while the pharaohs were busy carving out their immortality in hieroglyphs, your average farmer was probably too busy worrying about the next flood to care about the royal tomb's latest literary edition. But let's not dismiss the power of perception. The pharaohs were masterful at convincing people that a lion with a bird's head meant strength, and that this strength was an inherent trait of their rule. It's a bit like modern branding, where a swoosh or a bitten apple signifies more than just a logo. The pharaohs understood that symbols had power, and by controlling these symbols, they controlled the narrative. This was ancient spin doctoring at its finest, where a well-placed hieroglyph could bolster a ruler's image as effectively as any modern PR campaign. Now, did hieroglyphs serve a purpose beyond royal propaganda? Absolutely. They were the backbone of Egypt's complex bureaucracy, keeping the wheels of administration turning smoothly. But make no mistake, the power dynamics were clear. Those who could write, or at least those who could read what was written, held the keys to the kingdom. It's no wonder that literacy in hieroglyphs was a closely guarded skill, passed down through generations of scribes like a family heirloom. This wasn't just about preserving knowledge, it was about maintaining control. So, were hieroglyphs a royal PR stunt? Well, yes and no. They were certainly tools of propaganda, used to project power and divine authority. But they were also indispensable in managing an empire that stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the Nubian Desert, a feat that required meticulous record-keeping and communication. It's a little like asking if a smartphone is just for selfies, or if it's also a critical tool for navigating modern life. The answer, of course, lies somewhere in between. While we're dismantling myths, let's tackle the romantic notion of hieroglyphs as purely artistic expressions. Sure, they're beautiful, intricate, and downright mesmerizing, but their true beauty lay in their functionality. They were a language of power, designed to transcend time and space, ensuring that the pharaoh's voices echoed through the ages. It's a bit like the difference between a decorative vase and a utilitarian one. One might be a feast for the eyes, but the other holds water. In the world of hieroglyphs, form and function were two sides of the same coin. As we wrap up this chapter, keep in mind that the story of hieroglyphs is far from over. We've peeled back another layer, revealing the political machinations behind these ancient symbols. But there's still more to uncover as we journey deeper into Egypt's history. Stay with us as we explore the highs and lows of this ancient civilization, where the past isn't just a collection of dusty relics, but a vibrant tapestry of human ambition, ingenuity, and yes, a little bit of divine intervention. Keep your chisel sharp and your eyes open, because there's much more to discover in the sands of time. As we peel back yet another layer of Egypt's storied past, we find ourselves at a crossroads where ancient symbols met the foreign influence of Greek and Roman culture around 30 BCE. It's like the moment when your favorite band suddenly changes its sound to appeal to a wider audience. But instead of synthesizers and auto-tune, we're talking about alphabets and administrative shifts. You see, when the Greeks and Romans rolled into town, they didn't just bring olives and democracy. They brought their own writing systems. And the hieroglyphs, once the rock stars of Egyptian communication, started to feel like yesterday's news. This wasn't an overnight sensation, though. The decline of hieroglyphs was more of a slow fade than a dramatic exit stage left. By the time Cleopatra was rolling out the red carpet for Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, the Greek language had already begun its ascent in Egyptian society. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which ruled Egypt from 305 to 30 BCE, was a Greek affair through and through. With them came a new lingua franca that was less about elaborate carvings and more about streamlined efficiency. It was like swapping out your antique typewriter for the latest laptop. Practical, yes, but lacking a certain charm. The Romans, never ones to let a good administrative system go to waste, followed suit. By 30 BCE, Egypt had become a province of the Roman Empire, and Latin started getting cozy with Greek as the dominant languages of power. Hieroglyphs, once the high priests of communication, were relegated to temples and tombs, looking on as their more modern counterparts took center stage in the everyday business of running an empire. It's a bit like finding your old CD collection gathering dust while your Spotify playlist plays on repeat. But let's not get too nostalgic just yet, because while hieroglyphs may have been sidelined, they weren't entirely forgotten. Enter the Rosetta Stone, the linguistic equivalent of the Holy Grail. Discovered in 1799 by a French soldier during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, this slab of granodiorite was the key to unlocking the secrets of hieroglyphs. Measuring about 3 feet 9 inches high and weighing in at a hefty 680 pounds, the Rosetta Stone was inscribed with the same text in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. It was the ancient version of a multilingual dictionary, and it was about to change everything. You see, the Rosetta Stone was like finding a Rosetta Stone, literally and metaphorically. Before its discovery, hieroglyphs were more of a decorative mystery than a functional script. Scholars could admire them all they wanted, but understanding them, that was a different beast entirely. It took nearly 1,500 years for anyone to crack the code, and when they did, it wasn't some ancient Egyptian scribe who came to the rescue. No, it was a Frenchman named Jean-Francois Champollion who finally deciphered the hieroglyphs in 1822, proving once and for all that a little obsession can go a long way. Champalion was like the Sherlock Holmes of linguistics, piecing together the clues from the Greek text on the Rosetta Stone to understand the hieroglyphs. Imagine spending years poring over ancient scripts with the kind of dedication usually reserved for binge-watching your favorite series. But this wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a cultural revelation. Suddenly, the voices of ancient Egypt could be heard again, telling tales of gods and pharaohs, of harvests and taxes, of a civilization that had once ruled the sands. The irony of it all, a language designed to withstand the ravages of time, literally set in stone, was almost lost to history. It took the curiosity of a man from a different time and place to bring it back to life. It's a bit like finding a mixtape in a dusty attic, only to realize it holds the secrets of an entire civilization. The Rosetta Stone didn't just bridge the gap between ancient and modern worlds. It rekindled a fascination with hieroglyphs that continues to this day. So, what's the takeaway here? Well, it's a reminder that while languages may evolve, and empires may rise and fall, the stories they leave behind are timeless. The Greeks and Romans may have overshadowed hieroglyphs with their alphabets, but they couldn't erase the history etched into the stones of Egypt. And thanks to the Rosetta Stone, we're able to read those stories once more, understanding not just the words, but the world they came from. As we look back at the decline of hieroglyphs, it's a testament to the enduring power of language, even in the face of change. It's a reminder that history isn't just a collection of dates and facts. It's a living, breathing narrative that connects us to the past. And as we prepare to dive deeper into this narrative, exploring more of Egypt's rich tapestry, let's keep the spirit of discovery alive. The sands of time may shift, but the stories they conceal are waiting to be uncovered. Stay tuned, because the journey through Egypt's history is far from over, and there's much more to unravel in the chapters ahead. And now, as we find ourselves at the tail end of this historical roller coaster, let's take a moment to appreciate how hieroglyphs have managed to sneak their way back into the modern zeitgeist. Despite being sidelined for a few millennia, these symbols have made a comeback that would make any washed-up rock band green with envy. From tattoos to blockbuster movies, hieroglyphs have become the go-to symbols for anyone looking to add a dash of ancient mystery to their lives. And who can blame them? There's something inherently cool about sporting a tattoo that, at first glance, appears to be a profound piece of ancient wisdom, but might actually translate to "I like cats." Let's start with the obvious: tattoos. These days, people are getting inked with hieroglyphs like they're collecting ancient Parchemen. It's a trend that taps into the allure of the mysterious and the exotic, a way to whisper, "I'm deep," without actually saying it. But here's the kicker. Most of these tattoos are chosen more for their aesthetic appeal than their actual meaning. It's the classic case of style over substance, where the form outshines the function. Imagine an ancient Egyptian scribe seeing his carefully crafted symbols on someone's bicep, probably thinking, "That's not what I meant at all." Yet, despite the potential for linguistic faux pas, the fascination with hieroglyphs endures. They become a silent language, communicating a universal allure that transcends their original purpose. Then there's the world of pop culture, where hieroglyphs have been typecast as the ultimate symbols of mystery and adventure. Hollywood, ever the master of reinvention, has long exploited these ancient symbols to conjure images of dusty tombs and long-lost treasures. I mean, who hasn't watched an Indiana Jones movie and felt the urge to go artifact hunting in a fedora? Here, hieroglyphs serve as the cinematic shorthand for ancient secrets waiting to be unlocked. They're the original plot devices, the keys to narratives that promise the thrill of discovery. It's a nod to their historical role as conveyors of high-stakes information, albeit now in a more popcorn-fueled context. But let's not forget academia, where hieroglyphs are still the darlings of Egyptology. Scholars continue to pore over these symbols, piecing together the intricacies of a civilization that was as complex as its writing system. It's a testament to the enduring power of these symbols that they continue to captivate minds and fuel research. In the world of academia, every new discovery is like finding another piece of the puzzle, bringing us closer to understanding a society that thrived in the shadow of the pyramids. And while the romantic notion of hieroglyphs as mystical runes may persist, the reality is that they were, and still are, a language of both art and administration, of beauty and bureaucracy. So, what's the legacy of the hieroglyphs? Well, It's a complex tapestry woven from both fact and fiction, a reminder that history is often as much about the stories we tell as the facts we uncover. Hieroglyphs began as a practical solution for record-keeping, a way for ancient Egyptians to communicate with the gods and manage their earthly affairs. Yet, over time, they've become symbols of mystery and intrigue, of a civilization that continues to capture our imagination. It's a bit like finding your grandmother's old love letters. They might have been written for practical reasons, but they've taken on a new life as relics of a bygone era. But beyond the allure and the aesthetics, hieroglyphs offer us a lesson in the art of storytelling. The ancient Egyptians understood the power of narrative, of crafting messages that could transcend time and space. Their symbols were more than just words. They were a way to connect with the divine, to document history, and to assert power. It's a reminder that language is a tool of immense power, capable of shaping perceptions and influencing the course of history. And while the world has moved on to alphabets and emojis, the essence of what hieroglyphs represented, the ability to communicate complex ideas in a visually compelling way, remains as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. So, as we wrap up this journey through the sands of time, let's take a moment to appreciate the enduring legacy of hieroglyphs. They remind us that while civilizations may rise and fall, the stories they leave behind are timeless. And in a world where the pace of change is accelerating, where languages evolve at lightning speed, the hieroglyphs stand as a testament to the power of the written word. They are a bridge between the past and the present, a reminder that even the most ancient of symbols can find new life in the modern world. In the end, the story of hieroglyphs is a story of resilience, of a language that refused to be forgotten. It's a story that speaks to the enduring human need to communicate, to connect, and to leave a mark on the world. And as we continue to explore the mysteries of ancient Egypt, let's keep the spirit of discovery alive. Because who knows what other secrets are waiting to be uncovered, hidden in the sands of time. If you think Game of Thrones has drama, wait until you hear about Cyrus the Great. His life was a mix of myth, power plays, and more than a few strategic marriages. Move over Westeros. Born in 600 BC in a world where the average life expectancy was about 30, Cyrus was already defying odds just by surviving childhood. According to the law, his birth was so threatening that his grandfather, Astyages, the king of Media, ordered him to be killed. Talk about family drama. But here's the kicker. The executioner tasked with the job got cold feet and handed Cyrus off to a shepherd. Now, that's some serious outsourcing. Now, let's be real. The story of Cyrus being raised by a shepherd is a bit like saying Superman was raised by wolves. It makes for great storytelling, but it's more myth than history. What we do know is that he grew up in Persia, a province of the Median Empire, where he got his first taste of ruling by managing small territories. Think of it as an ancient version of interning at a Fortune 500 company. Fast forward to 550 BC, and Cyrus was ready to make his mark. He led a revolt against his grandfather Astyages with a band of merry men, except these guys were more about swords than singing. The battle was a classic underdog story, with Cyrus's forces outnumbered and outgunned. But here's where Cyrus's genius shone. He knew the Median army was full of disgruntled soldiers, so he offered them something novel, loyalty and better pay. It worked like a charm. The Median army turned against Astyages faster than a reality show alliance, and Cyrus took the throne without so much as a scratch. With Media in his pocket, Cyrus had his sights on bigger fish. He knew that ruling wasn't just about conquering territories. It was about uniting them. He needed to bring together the diverse tribes under one banner, a feat as challenging as herding cats. Enter his strategic alliances. Cyrus was the master of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. By marrying into prominent families and forging alliances, he turned potential rivals into allies. It was an early lesson in the art of diplomacy. Relatives by marriage are less likely to stab you in the back. Cyrus's secret weapon was his ability to speak softly while carrying a big stick. He didn't just conquer, he integrated. He respected the customs and religions of his new subjects, a tactic that was both shrewd and revolutionary for the time. This wasn't just benevolence, it was smart politics. You can't rule an empire with an iron fist when your subjects are busy plotting your demise. Instead, Cyrus offered a kind of ancient social contract. Follow me, and your life gets better. It's hard to rebel when you're busy prospering. But let's not forget the absurdities of royal propaganda. Ancient rulers loved a good tall tale, and Cyrus was no exception. Legends portrayed him as a benevolent ruler touched by the gods, practically glowing with divine favor. In reality, he was more of a savvy politician with a knack for public relations. Royal scribes might have painted him as the shepherd of the people, but he was very much the wolf in sheep's clothing, orchestrating power plays behind the scenes. All this maneuvering wasn't just for show. By 540 BC, Cyrus had laid the foundation for what would become one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. He wasn't just a conqueror. He was an architect, piecing together a mosaic of cultures, languages, and peoples. His empire stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, and he managed this expanse with a deft touch that made him the stuff of legend. So, while the myths might dress him up as a shepherd king with a divine mandate, the reality is that Cyrus the Great was more like a brilliant CEO, navigating the complexities of ancient geopolitics with a mix of charisma, strategy, and a healthy dose of luck. His story is a testament to the power of unity in diversity, and how sometimes the best way to rule is to let others follow willingly. Now that's a historical plot twist worth remembering. And just like that, Cyrus the Great was on a roll, and the next stop on his tour of conquest was Lydia. Think of Lydia as the Silicon Valley of the ancient world, rich, innovative, and a bit too smug for its own good. Led by King Croesus, who was practically Scrooge McDuck with his legendary wealth, Lydia wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mat for Cyrus, but Cyrus had his eyes set on that golden goose, and he wasn't about to take no for an answer. Now, let's talk tactics, because Cyrus wasn't just charging in like a bull in a china shop. Nope, he had a plan as cunning as a fox with a PhD in logistics. The Lydian cavalry was famous for its speed, so what did Cyrus do? He threw them a curveball in the form of camels. Yes, camels. Croesus's horses freaked out at the sight and smell of these humped beasts, creating chaos in the Lydian ranks. It was the ancient version of hacking the system, and it worked like a charm. The Battle of Thymbra in 547 BC ended with Lydia crumbling under Cyrus's innovative tactics, and Croesus's fortune became just another line item in Persia's growing ledger. But the conquest of Lydia wasn't just about military genius. It was a masterclass in understanding economic impact. By annexing Lydia, Cyrus gained control over the trade routes and the minting of coins. Yes, those little discs that make the world go round. Suddenly, Persia had a financial system that would make Wall Street blush, with Lydian gold and silver flowing into its coffers faster than you can say, cha-ching. The empire's GDP skyrocketed, and Cyrus had effectively turned Persia into the ancient world's economic superpower. With Lydia under his belt, Cyrus turned his gaze eastward, to Babylon, an empire so grand it made every other kingdom look like a backyard playset. Babylon was the crown jewel of Mesopotamia, a city of grandeur, hanging gardens, and walls thick enough to make any fortress blush with envy. But while its reputation was sky-high, its leadership was decidedly less so. Enter Nabonidus, Babylon's king, who was more interested in long holidays and religious renovations than actual governance. Cyrus saw an opportunity and seized it like a true opportunist. The conquest of Babylon in 539 BC was as much a political masterstroke as it was a military feat. Cyrus didn't just march in with swords swinging, he slipped in with the subtlety of a whisper. His spies spread propaganda like wildfire, painting him as a liberator rather than a conqueror. They played up Nabonidus's unpopularity and promised religious tolerance and stability. By the time Cyrus arrived at Babylon's gates, the city was practically rolling out the red carpet. Legend has it that he diverted the Euphrates River, allowing his troops to waltz into the city under cover of night. But let's not get too carried away with the dramatics. What really mattered was the precision and planning that allowed him to take Babylon with barely a fight. And boy, did Babylon pay off. Cyrus wasn't just after the glitzy palaces. He was after economic dominance. By capturing Babylon, he gained control of the Babylonian treasury, a veritable gold mine of resources. The impact was nothing short of revolutionary. With the wealth of Babylon, the Persian Empire expanded its infrastructure, built roads that would make the Roman Empire jealous, and funded projects that knit the empire together like a well-woven tapestry. But let's hit pause on this historical highlight reel and talk logistics. Imagine orchestrating these campaigns without modern-day conveniences like GPS or supply chains. Cyrus's army was like a well-oiled machine, moving with a precision that would make FedEx green with envy. They covered 30 miles a day, while managing to feed and equip tens of thousands of soldiers. We're talking about an ancient military operation that would put even the most ambitious startup to shame, using everything from camels to oxen to move supplies. It was a logistical ballet, with Cyrus as the master conductor. Economically, Cyrus's conquests were a game-changer. The wealth from Lydia and Babylon didn't just bolster the Persian treasury. It fueled an empire-wide economic boom. Trade flourished, with routes stretching from the Aegean to India. The empire's coffers were so full that historians estimate the Persian economy grew by a staggering 50% during his reign. Suddenly, Persia wasn't just a collection of territories. It was a thriving economic powerhouse, ready to rival any ancient civilization. Yet, for all his achievements, let's not forget that Cyrus was as much myth as man. While legends would have you believe he was some kind of demigod, his real genius lay in understanding that an empire is only as strong as its foundation. He didn't just build an empire, he built a legacy, one coin, one conquest, and one clever tactic at a time. The man was a visionary, a strategist, and yes, a bit of a magician when it came to turning the odds in his favor. So, as Cyrus's empire stretched across 3 continents, he didn't just leave behind a trail of conquered lands. He left a blueprint for ruling with a mix of fearlessness and finesse that would echo through history. But don't go thinking this story ends here. There's more to unravel in the tapestry of Cyrus's reign, and the threads are just beginning to weave a picture that's as complex as it is compelling. Stay tuned, because the tale of Cyrus the Great is far from over, and the next chapters promise even more intrigue and innovation. As the curtain rises on Cyrus's post-conquest administration, it's time to delve into the nitty-gritty of how this ancient empire managed to operate like a well-oiled machine without so much as a smartphone in sight. Picture this. An empire sprawling over 5 million square kilometers, from the bustling trade hubs of Anatolia to the lush riverbanks of the Indus. It was a logistical nightmare that would give even modern-day bureaucrats a headache. So, how did Cyrus keep this colossal entity from imploding under its own weight? Enter the satrapy system, a governance structure as ingenious as it was necessary. Think of satrapies as the ancient version of states or provinces, each ruled by a satrap, a sort of governor with a fancy title. These satraps were tasked with maintaining order, collecting taxes, and generally keeping the peace. In other words, they did the dirty work while Cyrus played puppet master from his imperial throne. But let's not sugarcoat it. These weren't benevolent democracy workshops. Satraps had a penchant for corruption, and some were more interested in lining their pockets than serving the empire. Cyrus, ever the pragmatist, knew this and kept them on a tight leash with a little thing called spies. Yes, the eyes and ears of the empire were everywhere. It was like living in a soap opera where everyone was a double agent. The satrapy system was a masterstroke in decentralized governance, allowing Cyrus to maintain control over his vast lands without having to micromanage. It was a bit like having regional managers in a multinational corporation, each with the autonomy to handle local affairs, but always answering to the head office. This system allowed for local customs and laws to persist, which was no small feat in an empire teeming with cultural diversity. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but it was efficient, at least by ancient standards. And let's face it, in a time when messages moved at the speed of a donkey, that's saying something. Now, speaking of cultural diversity, let's tackle one of Cyrus's most enduring legacies, his policy of religious tolerance. This wasn't just some fluffy idealism. It was a calculated move to keep the empire from fracturing under the weight of its many faiths. The empire was a melting pot of Zoroastrians, Babylonians, Jews, and countless others, each with their own gods and rituals. Instead of imposing a single religion, Cyrus let his subjects worship as they pleased. It was a strategy that was both rare and revolutionary for its time. Cue the Cyrus cylinder, often touted as the world's first declaration of human rights. But let's pump the brakes on that romantic notion. The cylinder was more press release than Magna Carta. a clay artifact carved with proclamations of Cyrus's benevolence and divine favor. It declared the liberation of Babylon and the restoration of religious sites, which sounds noble until you realize it was more about securing loyalty than championing freedom. The cylinder was essentially Cyrus's PR campaign, spinning his image as a liberator while subtly reminding everyone who was really in charge. It's as if the empire had its own ancient Instagram, crafting a brand that was part truth, part strategic embellishment. But let's not completely dismiss the cylinder's impact. It did set a precedent for rulers who came after, and it certainly beats the convert or die approach that so many other conquerors favored. It's just that while the cylinder paints Cyrus as a saintly figure, the reality was a bit more Machiavellian. His tolerance wasn't altruism. It was a cunning way to prevent rebellion and maintain stability across a patchwork of peoples with wildly different beliefs. So, what's the takeaway here? Cyrus wasn't just playing a game of Risk. He was orchestrating a symphony of governance and diplomacy. His empire was less about brute force and more about the delicate art of balancing power, culture, and economy. By creating a system that allowed for local autonomy under the watchful eye of the central authority, he fostered a sense of unity without crushing individuality. It was a tightrope walk, and Cyrus had the grace of a seasoned acrobat. But before we get too misty-eyed about this enlightened ruler, let's remember that governing an empire wasn't all about tolerance and satraps. It was also about keeping the treasury flush and the roads open for business. Cyrus's conquests had filled the empire's coffers, but maintaining that wealth required constant vigilance, and yes, more than a little taxation. This was an economy driven by agriculture, trade, and tribute, and it needed careful management to avoid slipping into chaos. The Persian Empire's infrastructure was its lifeline, with a network of roads that stretched like veins through its vast territories. These roads facilitated trade, communication, and military movement, ensuring that goods and information could flow as smoothly as possible. The Royal Road, stretching over 500 kilometers from Sardis to Susa, was the empire's superhighway, allowing messengers to traverse the empire in record time, just 7 days by relay, according to Herodotus. Now, that's the ancient equivalent of overnight shipping. Economically, this connectivity was a game changer, linking disparate markets and fostering a flow of goods that would be the envy of any modern economy. It was a system that bolstered the empire's stability, allowing for the exchange of not just products, but ideas and cultures. In a way, Cyrus was building more than an empire. He was laying the groundwork for a new world order, one where diversity wasn't just tolerated, but woven into the very fabric of society. Yet, for all his achievements, Cyrus was not infallible. The empire he built was a delicate balance, and like any empire, it had its faults and weaknesses. The satrapy system, while effective, relied heavily on the competence and loyalty of its satraps, a variable that was as unpredictable as the weather. Meanwhile, the policy of religious tolerance, though progressive, was a constant juggling act, requiring careful diplomacy to ensure that no group felt marginalized or oppressed. As we wrap up this installment of our saga, let's keep in mind that Cyrus's story is far from over. His legacy would continue to shape the course of history, influencing not only the empires that followed, but the very nature of governance itself. So, stay tuned as we delve further into the life and times of this ancient trailblazer, where the only certainty is that there's always more than meets the eye. Cyrus's tale is a tapestry still being woven, and as we pull on the threads of his legacy, we'll find a pattern that stretches far beyond Persia's borders. Fast forward to the 4th century BC, and here comes Alexander the Great, striding through history like he owns the place. But hold your horses. Alexander's playbook had more than a few chapters borrowed from Cyrus. You see, Cyrus wasn't just a historical footnote. He was the blueprint for every empire builder who followed, Alexander included. When Alexander swept through Persia like a kid in a candy store, he wasn't just grabbing territory. He was picking up lessons from Cyrus on how to keep what he conquered. Alexander marveled at the way Cyrus managed to juggle a mosaic of cultures without dropping any, or at least not too many. The Macedonian king understood that an empire wasn't just about muscle. It was about managing diverse peoples with a deft touch. Sound familiar? That's Cyrus 101. Alexander even went so far as to pay homage at Cyrus's tomb in Pasargadae, a move that was part respect, part strategic PR. He wanted to be seen as a legitimate successor to the Persian throne, not just some Western upstart. It's like a modern CEO bowing to the legacy of a company's founder while promising to take the firm to new heights. And just like Cyrus, Alexander knew the value of a good image campaign. But let's take a detour down the rabbit hole of Cyrus's demise. The year was 530 BC, and Cyrus, the man who seemed invincible, finally met his match. Or did he? The circumstances of his death are as murky as a politician's tax returns. Some say he was killed in battle against the Massagetae, a nomadic tribe from Central Asia led by Queen Tamaris. According to Herodotus, Tamaris had Cyrus's head cut off and dunked in a wineskin full of blood as a posthumous revenge. Now, that's a plot twist George R.R. Martin would envy. But hold your skepticism hats, folks. Herodotus was known to sprinkle his histories with more spice than a Thanksgiving pumpkin pie. Other accounts suggest Cyrus died peacefully in his bed, a far less cinematic finale. The truth, likely somewhere in between, but the blood-soaked myth makes for a juicier tale, doesn't it? Whatever the cause, Cyrus's death left a power vacuum that echoed through the ancient world. His successors, starting with his son Cambyses Roman II, inherited an empire that was at once a marvel and a minefield. Keeping it all together was no small feat, and it's here that the cracks of empire building began to show. Cyrus had set high bars for governance and expansion, but the real magic was in his policies that outlasted him. His knack for cultural integration and tolerance became the gold standard for future rulers. Leaders from Augustus to Akbar took a leaf out of Cyrus's book, realizing that ruling with an iron fist is less effective than ruling with a velvet glove. It's a lesson some modern leaders might do well to remember, though the whole tolerance thing seems to be a bit of a sticky wicket for some. And let's not forget the economic savvy that Cyrus brought to the table. His empire was a well-oiled machine, with trade routes that fueled prosperity and innovation. You could almost say Cyrus invented globalization before it was cool. The coins minted under his rule were more than just currency. They were a symbol of unity and strength, a tangible reminder of his empire's reach. Now, if you're thinking this all sounds too good to be true, you're not alone. Cyrus was no saint, and ruling an empire wasn't all benevolence and tolerance. There were taxes to be paid and rebellions to be squashed. The satrapy system, for all its brilliance, was a double-edged sword. Satraps could be as treacherous as they were useful, and keeping them in line was a full-time job. But Cyrus's genius lay in his ability to navigate these challenges, balancing power with pragmatism. His policies weren't just about keeping the empire afloat. They were about setting a standard for what an empire could be. He didn't just conquer lands. He built bridges, sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively, between cultures. In modern parlance, Cyrus was the Steve Jobs of empire building. He saw what others didn't, and he turned that vision into reality. But unlike Jobs, Cyrus didn't have the luxury of tech support or market analysts. His empire was built on instinct, diplomacy, and a fair bit of trial and error. And while he didn't leave behind a sleek tech gadget, he left a legacy that shaped the course of history. So as we close this chapter on Cyrus's life, remember that his story is far from finished. The echoes of his achievements continue to resonate, a testament to the power of visionary leadership. Cyrus the Great may have passed into the annals of history, but his influence is as present as ever, a reminder that sometimes the greatest empires are those built on the foundations of unity and respect. And with that, we leave Cyrus's empire to simmer in the cauldron of history until next time. There's more to uncover in the saga of this ancient trailblazer, so stay tuned for the next installment, where the past continues to collide with the present in ways that are as surprising as they are enlightening. So, let's dive back into the swirling sands of time, where Cyrus the Great left a mark so indelible that even millennia later, his legacy lingers like an ancient perfume. Sure, his reign was punctuated with tales that would make any aspiring novelist drool. Heroic conquests, a touch of divine favor, and enough intrigue to fill a season of a Netflix drama. But let's not get swept away in the romanticism without peering through the cracks at the gritty underbelly of empire building. Cyrus's legacy, much like an onion, has layers. Peel back the mythic narratives, like the one where he's a benevolent king born of miraculous origins, and you'll find the harsh reality of ancient politics and warfare. His empire was no utopia. It was a complex machine fueled by power, diplomacy, and yes, a fair bit of ruthlessness to govern an empire that stretched over 5 million square kilometers, spanning 3 continents from the Nile to the Indus. Cyrus needed more than charisma. He needed a bureaucratic juggernaut, and the satrapy system was his ace in the hole. These satraps managed regions like mini-kingdoms, and their success hinged on a delicate balance of local autonomy and central oversight. It was a bit like herding cats, where each cat had its own agenda, and some were as likely to scratch as they were to purr. But here's the kicker. Cyrus's empire wasn't just a patchwork quilt of conquered lands. It was a bustling marketplace of ideas, where traders and scholars crisscrossed the empire's legendary roads. The Royal Road, stretching 500 kilometers from Sardis to Susa, was more than just a path for military messengers. It was the ancient Silk Road, a conduit for commerce and culture. This infrastructure didn't just bolster the economy. It stitched the empire together with threads of trade and tolerance. Economically, the Persian Empire became a powerhouse, with a GDP that some estimates suggest ballooned by 50% under Cyrus's reign. Not too shabby for a guy who started out as a regional upstart. Now, let's tackle the romanticized notion of Cyrus as the first champion of human rights. Yes, the Cyrus Cylinder is often hailed as the earliest charter of human rights, but before you break out the party poppers, remember that it was as much propaganda as policy. Inscribed in Babylonian cuneiform, this clay cylinder wasn't a universal declaration, but a political manifesto, proclaiming Cyrus's benevolence while subtly reinforcing his dominance. It's the ancient equivalent of a press release written in stone, declaring to the world that Cyrus was a liberator, not just a conqueror. The truth, it was less about altruism and more about stability, a clever tactic to placate diverse populations and keep the empire from fracturing. And yet, for all the practical politics behind it, the Cyrus Cylinder did set a precedent. It echoed through the corridors of history, influencing rulers from Augustus to Akbar, who recognized that the iron fist was less effective than the velvet glove. It's a lesson that seems as relevant today as it was back then. Governing through fear might win battles, but it's tolerance and diplomacy that win peace. Fast forward to today, and Cyrus is still a cultural icon, especially in Iran, where he's celebrated as a national hero. His tomb in Pasargadae remains a symbol of Persian pride, though its modest design might surprise those expecting a kingly monument. In fact, it's a simple stone structure, more modest mausoleum than majestic palace. But this humility speaks volumes about Cyrus's enduring appeal, a ruler who, despite the grandeur of his conquests, understood the power of restraint. Yet, let's not gloss over the darker side of Cyrus's legacy. Empire building in the ancient world wasn't all scrolls and diplomacy. It involved warfare, taxes, and the ever-present threat of rebellion. The satrapy system, for all its ingenuity, was a double-edged sword. Satraps could be corrupt or ambitious, and managing them required a delicate touch. Think of it as trying to keep a circus running when the clowns have their own agendas. And while Cyrus's policy of religious tolerance was progressive, it wasn't without its challenges. Balancing the needs and beliefs of myriad cultures required constant vigilance and a knack for negotiation. So, what do we take away from Cyrus's story? Beyond the myths and legends, there's a reality that's both inspiring and cautionary. Cyrus wasn't just a conqueror. He was a strategist who saw beyond the battlefield to the broader canvas of governance. His empire was a grand experiment in multiculturalism, a testament to the power of unity through diversity. It was a world where different peoples could coexist, not because they were forced to, but because they were allowed to. But let's not wrap this up with a neat bow of nostalgia. The reality of empire building was a messy, often brutal affair, and Cyrus was as much a product of his time as he was a trailblazer. His legacy is a reminder that history is rarely black and white, and the stories we tell about the past are as complex and multifaceted as the people who lived them. As we close the book on Cyrus the Great, remember that his story is not just a tale of ancient conquests, but a mirror reflecting our own struggles with power, diversity, and governance. In a world where division often seems the norm, Cyrus's vision of unity offers a lesson worth heeding. It's a reminder that the greatest empires aren't built on conquest alone, but on the bonds that hold them together. So, the next time you hear a story that seems too good to be true, take a leaf from Cyrus's playbook. Dig deeper, question the narrative, and look beyond the legend to find the truth that lies beneath. Because in the end, history isn't just about the past. It's a guide to understanding the present, and maybe, just maybe, a roadmap to a better future. And with that, we leave Cyrus the Great to his well-earned place in the annals of history, a ruler whose legacy continues to inspire, challenge, and remind us of the complexities of human nature. In the sun-drenched cradle of the Aegean Sea, an island named Lesbos quietly played host to one of history's most enigmatic poets, Sappho. Born somewhere around 630 BCE, Sappho's life began under a sky that seemed to bleed poetry, but don't let the romantic imagery fool you. This was no easy stroll through idyllic vineyards. Lesbos, aside from its scenic beauty, was a buzzing hive of political conflict and social stratification. Sappho's family was part of the elite, which meant they were right in the thick of it, like living in a soap opera where everyone wore togas. Her aristocratic roots gave her a front-row seat to the island's political drama. Now, this wasn't ancient Greece's version of the Real Housewives, but think of it more like Game of Thrones without the dragons. Lesbos was a hotbed of political intrigue, with tyrants and councils constantly playing musical chairs with power. The island was known for its strategic location and fertile land, something that invited both trade and trouble. Around the time Sappho was born, the island was under the thumb of Pittacus, one of the fabled 7 sages of Greece. This guy was a philosopher-warrior hybrid and held power for about a decade from 590 BCE. Pittacus was a big deal, but his rule was hardly a peaceful one, with tensions simmering like an unattended pot of stew. Sappho's family was likely involved in the political turmoil that characterized Lesbos. Her father, possibly named Scamandronymus, try saying that 3 times fast, was reputedly a wealthy merchant. While ancient sources are about as reliable as a weather forecast, it suggested that Sappho had 3 brothers, Charaxos, Laritschos, and Eurygeos, the Greek equivalent of a boy band that never quite made it big. Her brother Charaxos was known for his scandalous affair with a courtesan named Rhodopes, an act that might have caused some family drama, though the historical accuracy of this tale is debated with the vigor of a modern Twitter feud. Now, let's get to the poetic side of things. In this era, the education system wasn't exactly co-ed. Women were generally expected to stay at home, learn how to manage a household, and produce heirs. Riveting stuff. But Sappho, thanks to her family's status and possibly liberal views, received an education that included poetry, music, and even politics, subjects usually reserved for the boys. Her compositions were marked by personal reflections, emotional depth, and an innovative use of the Greek language. She wrote in a dialect called Ialic, which was as melodious as it was complex. The cultural scene of Lesbos was as rich as its olive oil. The island was famed for its literary and musical traditions. It wasn't just the men who gathered to share verses and strum lyres. Women like Sappho were in on the action too, albeit in more private settings. She likely led a thiosos, a sort of ancient Greek sorority, where she mentored young women in the arts of love and poetry. Think of it as a finishing school, but instead of learning how to curtsy, you learned how to craft verses that could make an ancient Greek blush. Sappho's poetry didn't just happen in a vacuum. The vibrant culture of Lesbos, with its blend of Eastern and Western influences, provided a fertile ground for her artistic growth. The island's strategic position meant it was a melting pot, with traders and travelers constantly passing through, each bringing a bit of their own culture to the mix. It was this diversity that likely exposed Sappho to a wide range of ideas and styles, which she deftly wove into her poetry. Despite her evident talent, Sappho lived in a society that was, let's say, not exactly progressive when it came to gender equality. Women were often relegated to the domestic sphere, their voices muted behind the walls of their homes. Yet, Sappho's work defied these constraints. Her poetry spoke with such clarity and emotion that it transcended the social norms of her time. She wrote about love, desire, and personal anguish with an honesty that still resonates today. Sappho's legacy is shrouded in both mystery and myth. The fact that her work has survived at all is a minor miracle, given that ancient texts had about as much chance of surviving as a popsicle in the Greek sun. But her fragments, those tantalizing snippets of her genius, continue to captivate scholars and romantics alike. What we know of her life is pieced together from references by later writers, most of whom were men with their own agendas. It's like trying to construct a portrait from a puzzle where half the pieces are missing and the rest have been chewed on by history's dog. As Sappho's renown grew, so did the stories about her. She was often depicted as a woman of intense passions, something that scandalized and fascinated her contemporaries. Her name became synonymous with love and desire, particularly of the same-sex variety, which has sparked endless debate among historians. Was Sappho gay, bisexual, or simply a woman who wrote about love in a way that transcended labels? The truth is, we don't know. What we do know is that her poetry expressed a kind of emotional authenticity that was revolutionary for its time. In a world where the voices of women were often silenced, Sappho sang louder than most. Her early life on Lesbos set the stage for her future fame, a fame that would endure for millennia. Her aristocratic background, her education, and the vibrant cultural landscape of her island all contributed to shaping a poet whose work continues to echo through the corridors of history. As we delve deeper into her life, keep in mind that Sappho was not just a product of her time. She was a trailblazer, a woman who dared to write her own story in a world that preferred women to remain silent. So, picking up where we left off, let's dive into Sappho's poetic journey, a path that slashed through the male-dominated thicket of Greek literature like a hot knife through feeder. Now, Sappho wasn't just any poet. She was a lyric poet, a term that might conjure images of 90s boy bands crooning under a streetlight, but back in Sappho's day, it was a whole different gig. The word lyric refers to the lyre, an ancient harp-like instrument, and Sappho's verses were meant to be sung with musical accompaniment, not just read like an ancient scroll at a book club. Her work was all about intimacy and personal emotion, a stark contrast to the grandiose epics of her male counterparts, who preferred to write about blood-soaked battlefields and heroic deeds. Think of Homer and his Iliad, with its endless parade of war gods and warriors. Sappho, on the other hand, zeroed in on the microcosm of human feelings, capturing the complexities of love, jealousy, and longing with a raw honesty that could make Achilles himself blush. Her poetry was as much about the music of language as it was the language of music, each word carefully chosen for its sound as well as its meaning. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly set Sappho apart? It wasn't just her focus on the personal that made her special. It was how she structured her work. Sappho's poetry was often composed in what's now called Sapphic meter, a pattern of syllables and stresses that was as intricate as it was innovative. Imagine a verbal tapestry, each line woven with a precise combination of long and short syllables that created a rhythm all its own. It's as if she invented her own poetic genre, like Shakespeare with his sonnets or Doctor, Seuss with his tongue-twisting rhymes. This unique style allowed her to express emotions with a depth that was both simple and profound. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. Sappho was writing at a time when being a female poet was about as common as finding a needle in a haystack, or a feminist at a Greek symposium. Women in ancient Greece were supposed to weave and bear children, not weave words into poetry. Despite these societal constraints, Sappho carved out a niche for herself, possibly because of her aristocratic background. Her family's wealth and status likely provided her with the resources and education that most women of her time could only dream of. Yet even with this privilege, her career was no walk in the park. Imagine trying to get your voice heard when the literary world was dominated by men who probably thought women's opinions were as useful as a sponge in a sandstorm. Sappho had to navigate a society where female voices were often silenced or overshadowed. She likely faced criticism and skepticism, not to mention the ever-present risk of being reduced to a footnote in the annals of history. And yet, she persisted. Her poetry not only survived but thrived, influencing countless poets who came after her. One such poet was Catullus, a Roman poet who lived about 600 years after Sappho. Catullus openly admired Sappho's work and even translated one of her poems into Latin, which is quite the compliment, considering translations back then were like the ancient equivalent of a viral tweet. He was so inspired by her style that he adopted some of her themes and meters. proving that Sappho's influence reached far beyond the shores of Lesbos. And then there was Horace, another Roman poet who lived a bit later than Catullus. Horace was no slouch when it came to poetry, and he too was captivated by Sappho's work. He borrowed her meters and praised her genius, acknowledging her as a master of the craft. It's like Sappho was the Beyoncé of her time, with everyone from Catullus to Horace wanting to sample her work. Her influence stretched across centuries, a testament to the power and universality of her poetry. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, the fact that much of Sappho's work has been lost to time. What we have today are mere fragments, little snippets of her lyrical genius, pieced together like a shattered vase, painstakingly reassembled. These fragments hint at a vast body of work that once existed, a library of emotion and insight that was likely destroyed or simply left to decay. And why? Well, the reasons are as varied as they are frustrating. Some blame the early Christian church, which wasn't exactly a fan of Sappho's themes of love and desire, viewing them as a bit too scandalous for their liking. Others point to the simple fragility of ancient texts, which had about as much chance of surviving as a sandcastle in a tsunami. So here we are, left with tantalizing glimpses of Sappho's work, a poetic jigsaw puzzle missing half its pieces. Yet even in these fragments, her voice rings clear. Her poetry speaks to us across the millennia, a reminder that the human experience, with all its messiness and beauty, is timeless. Sappho didn't just write about love. She wrote about the human condition, crafting verses that resonate with anyone who's ever felt the sting of unrequited affection or the thrill of newfound passion. As we continue to explore Sappho's life and legacy, keep in mind that she wasn't just a poet. She was a pioneer. Her work broke through the barriers of her time, proving that a woman's voice could be as powerful and enduring as any man's. So next time you hear someone dismiss ancient poetry as old-fashioned or irrelevant, just remember Sappho, an ancient Greek woman whose words still have the power to move us today, even if we only have a few fragments left to cling to. Stay tuned, because there's so much more to uncover about this legendary poet and her remarkable impact on the world of literature. As we continue unraveling the enigma that is Sappho, let's dive headfirst into the juicy stuff, her personal life, or at least what history and mythology have spun together in a tangled web of fact and fiction. Sappho's story is like a classic game of telephone, where each retelling adds a layer of fantasy or scandal, leaving us to sort through the tangled threads of truth and legend. First off, let's talk about the image of Sappho as the tragic lover. This idea is as pervasive as it is enticing, but how much of it holds water? The tale of Sappho's supposed leap to her death from the cliffs of Lefkada, driven to despair by unrequited love for a ferryman named Phaon, is as dramatic as a season finale of a soap opera. It's got it all: romance, heartbreak, and a tragic ending. But here's the kicker: there's zero historical evidence to back it up. This story first pops up in the works of later writers, centuries after Sappho's time, like the Roman poet Ovid, who had a penchant for drama that would make a reality TV producer blush. So why did this myth take off like a chariot on fire? Well, it plays into the timeless archetype of the tragic romantic, a character type that still draws audiences today. Think Romeo and Juliet, but with more toga and less Capulet-Montague feud. This narrative makes Sappho relatable, a figure who feels deeply and suffers grandly, which is catnip for the human fascination with love and loss. But let's be clear, the evidence for this story is about as solid as a sandcastle at high tide. Now, onto the juicier topic of Sappho's sexuality. This part of her life has sparked more debate than a Thanksgiving dinner discussion about politics. Was she gay, bisexual, or simply a woman who expressed love in a way that defied easy categorization? The truth is, ancient Greek sexuality didn't fit neatly into modern labels. Concepts of sexual orientation, as we understand them today, simply didn't exist. Relationships were often more about power dynamics and social structures than strictly who you fancied. What we do know is that Sappho's poetry shows a deep affection and admiration for women, with verses that speak of love, beauty, and intimacy. For instance, her fragmentary poem 31, often referred to as the Ode to Anactoria, describes the overwhelming physical sensation of seeing a beloved woman. It's visceral, raw, and deeply personal, enough to make even the most stoic classicist feel a flutter. However, interpreting these poems purely through the lens of modern sexuality might be anachronistic. Think of it more as a window into the complex relational dynamics of her world. Notion of Sappho as a lesbian, in the modern sense, is largely a product of later interpretations, especially during the Renaissance, when scholars began to view her work through their own cultural lenses. The term lesbian itself, derived from the island of Lesbos, only gained its current connotation centuries later. So, while Sappho's work certainly explores female same-sex attraction, pinning her down with a modern label is like trying to catch a sunbeam in a jar. Part of the allure of Sappho's legend also lies in the mystery of her Thyasos, that ancient sorority where she mentored young women. Was this a school, a religious cult, a glorified book club with liars? The answer is, we don't entirely know. But it was likely a cultural institution where the lines between education, worship, and social bonding blurred like watercolors in the rain. In this environment, expressions of love and beauty among women were likely more accepted and celebrated than in the broader patriarchal society. Her Thyasos was a space where the usual rules didn't apply, a kind of ancient safe haven for female creativity and camaraderie. Now, let's not forget the economic and social pressures of Sappho's world, which shaped these dynamics. In a society where marriages were often arranged for economic or political alliances rather than love, personal relationships could take on different forms and meanings. Love and affection might be found outside the confines of marriage, and Sappho's poetry reflects this reality. Her work offers a glimpse into the emotional lives of women, whose experiences were often hidden behind the public facade of family and duty. Despite the romanticized image of Sappho as a tragic lover, it's essential to remember that she lived in a complex and vibrant world, one where love wasn't just about personal feelings, but also about social connections and cultural expression. Her poetry thrived in this milieu, capturing the nuanced tapestry of human relationships in a way that still resonates with us today. To add another layer of intrigue, some ancient sources describe Sappho as having a daughter named Clays, which complicates the narrative further. The existence of a daughter suggests that Sappho might have been married, though details about her husband are as elusive as a shadow at noon. The name Clays itself appears in Sappho's poetry, but whether this refers to a daughter, a lover, or a poetic muse is up for debate. In any case, Clays adds a dimension to Sappho's life that challenges the stereotype of the solitary, lovelorn poet. So, while the myths surrounding Sappho paint her as a figure of tragic romance and forbidden love, the historical reality is likely far more intricate. Her poetry, with all its passion and intensity, offers insights into her world, but it doesn't provide a neat biography or a tidy conclusion. Instead, it invites us to explore the rich and varied human experience, with all its messiness and contradictions. In the end, Sappho remains an enigma, a figure whose life and work continue to captivate and confound us. Her legacy is a testament to the enduring power of poetry to transcend time and speak to the deepest parts of our humanity. As we move forward, keep in mind that Sappho's story is one of both legend and reality, a delicate dance between what we know and what we can only imagine. There's still much more to uncover about this remarkable woman and the world she inhabited, so stay tuned as we continue our journey through the life and legacy of the poet from Lesbos. And so we find ourselves standing at the crossroads of Sappho's legacy, a legacy both luminous and fragmented, like a shattered mirror reflecting the many faces of her influence. You see, Sappho's reach extended far beyond the tranquil shores of Lesbos, her words weaving their way through the fabric of literary history with a tenacity that would make even the most indomitable marathon runner blush. But how did her work survive when so much was lost to the relentless march of time? Well, my historically curious friend, buckle up, because this ride involves a cast of ancient scholars, medieval monks, and a sprinkle of good old-fashioned serendipity. First, let's talk about the elephant in the library, the tragic loss of Sappho's oeuvre. Of the estimated 9 volumes of her poetry, what do we have left? A measly collection of fragments and a mere handful of complete poems. It's like being handed a single popcorn kernel when you're expecting a full bucket. So, what happened to the rest? Blame it on the triple threat of time, neglect, and censorship. Ancient texts had a survival rate akin to a snowball's chance in Hades. Papyrus and parchment were fragile mediums, prone to decay and damage, and the political or religious winds of change often determined what was worth preserving. Enter the scholars of antiquity, the folks who decided which pieces of literature were worth copying, preserving, and teaching. By the time the Roman Empire was in full swing, Sappho's work had caught the eye of cultural heavyweights like Catullus and Horace, who saw her as a muse and mentor from across the centuries. Catullus, whose work dates to the 1st century BCE, even translated some of her poems into Latin, the ancient world's equivalent of a mixtape homage. But the real MVPs in preserving her legacy were the Hellenistic scholars of Alexandria, who diligently catalogued and critiqued works from across the Greek world during the 3rd century BCE. Imagine them like the librarians of Alexandria, tasked with assembling a literary canon that would echo through time. But let's not forget the medieval monks, the unsung heroes who, between illuminating manuscripts and chanting vespers, painstakingly copied ancient texts by hand. In the Middle Ages, they were the custodians of classical knowledge, operating in dimly lit scriptoria where the flicker of candlelight was the only guide against the encroaching darkness of ignorance. These scribes were the internet of their day, disseminating knowledge one painstakingly copied page at a time. However, even they couldn't save everything, and Sappho's work was often deemed too risque or irrelevant in a world increasingly dominated by Christian doctrine. Despite this, her influence remained, slipping through the cracks of history like sunlight through a broken shutter. Her style and themes resonated with poets across the ages, from the passionate verses of Ovid, who knew a thing or two about scandalous love poetry, to the structured forms of Petrarch, whose sonnets echoed the emotional immediacy Sappho had pioneered. She was the ghost in the literary machine, inspiring countless writers who had never read more than a sliver of her work. Fast forward to the Renaissance, when Europe was awash with a renewed interest in classical antiquity. Scholars and poets were dusting off the old tomes and rediscovering the works of ancient Greece and Rome. In this fervor for all things classical, Sappho's legend was revived, albeit more as a symbol than a source. Her name became synonymous with lyric poetry, love, and the complexities of the human heart, qualities that aligned perfectly with the Renaissance ideal of humanism. Yet, ironically, while her reputation was reimagined, her actual verses remained elusive, like a celebrity whose fame is greater than the sum of their work. The 19th century brought a new wave of interest in Sappho, fueled by both archaeological discoveries and the burgeoning field of classical studies. Scholars unearthed papyri in Egypt, including fragments of Sappho's poems that had been used as part of the mummy cartonnage. Talk about recycling. These scraps of text were like finding a forgotten treasure map, offering tantalizing glimpses into her poetic genius. But even with these new discoveries, the picture remained incomplete, a jigsaw puzzle with too many missing pieces. By the 20th century, Sappho had become an icon, her name evoking both the mystery of the past and the promise of the modern. Her work and life inspired feminist movements, LGBTQ+ communities, and anyone who saw in her poetry a reflection of their own struggles and passions. Sappho was no longer just an ancient poet. She was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the enduring power of art to transcend the barriers of time and culture. Yet, for all the mythologizing and romanticizing, it's crucial to remember the economic and social realities that shaped Sappho's world. The island of Lesbos, with its strategic location and fertile lands, was a microcosm of the larger Greek world, where trade, politics, and culture intermingled in a vibrant tapestry. Sappho's poetry was not created in a vacuum. It was a product of her environment, reflecting the complexities of a society where women were often seen but rarely heard. Her legacy also underscores the stark realities of cultural preservation. The survival of texts was often subject to the whims of history, affected by everything from natural disasters to changing political regimes. Sappho's work is a reminder of the fragile nature of human creativity, a whisper from the past that has somehow managed to defy the odds and reach us today. As we delve deeper into the impact of Sappho's poetry, it's clear that her legacy is not just about the words she wrote, but the conversations those words have sparked across millennia. She has been a muse, a mystery, and a mirror reflecting the ever-changing landscape of human emotion. Her influence has permeated literature, art, and culture, a testament to the timeless nature of her insights into love, desire, and the human condition. Even now, as new fragments are discovered, and scholars continue to piece together the puzzle of her life and work, Sappho remains an enigmatic figure, her legacy a blend of what we know and what we long to discover. Her poetry, though incomplete, continues to resonate, challenging us to explore the depths of our own humanity and to find beauty in the fragments of our existence. As we wrap up this chapter of our exploration, remember that Sappho's story is far from over. Her influence continues to ripple through time, shaping the way we understand poetry, passion, and the power of the written word. So, stay tuned as we continue our journey into the world of Sappho, where history and legend intertwine in a dance as intricate as the lyrical meter she so expertly crafted. So, as we stand on the brink of Sappho's legacy, you might wonder how a poet from a tiny island managed to carve her name so deeply into the bedrock of history. In an age where texts were literally texts, think parchment, not pixels, Sappho somehow became an immortal, her influence echoing through the centuries like the most persistent earworm. But why does she resonate so strongly with us today, when we've got a million other distractions, from TikTok to the latest dystopian TV drama? Let's get one thing straight. Sappho's enduring appeal isn't just about her poetry, although that's a huge part of it. It's about what she represents. In a world where women were often confined to roles that involved more loom weaving and less lyric writing, she was a blazing comet of creativity and defiance. She captured the raw, messy essence of human emotion in a way that feels as fresh now as it did over 600 years ago. Her words on love, longing, and heartache cut through the noise of history like a laser beam through fog, speaking to anyone who's ever had a crush, a heartbreak, or one too many glasses of Retsina. Nowadays, Sappho has become a kind of cultural chameleon, her image adapted and reimagined to fit modern narratives. In academia, she's often hailed as a feminist icon, a symbol of female empowerment in a patriarchal society. Her work challenges us to rethink gender roles and the historical marginalization of women's voices. Just imagine her surprise if she knew that her poetry would one day fuel discussions in university lecture halls, where students debate her sexuality, her societal impact, and the nuances of her lyrical style. Who knew that Aeolic dialect could spark so much conversation? In pop culture, Sappho has become a poster child for LGBTQ+ representation. Her exploration of same-sex desire has been embraced by communities looking for historical figures who break the heteronormative mold. It's a testament to the power of her poetry that, despite the murkiness of historical interpretation, she has become an emblem of love that defies conventional boundaries. It's like she's been adopted as the unofficial bard of the rainbow flag, her verses celebrated for their authenticity and emotional depth. But what would Sappho think about her posthumous fame? Would she be flattered, bemused, or just plain confused by the modern world's obsession with her life and loves? Considering the few surviving fragments of her work, it's hard to say. But one thing's for sure, Sappho understood the power of words to transcend time. Her poetry was a way to capture the ephemeral, turning fleeting moments of beauty and pain into something permanent. In a way, she was writing for an audience she could never have imagined. Her verses a message in a bottle tossed into the vast ocean of history. Let's not forget the broader implications of Sappho's work on our understanding of gender, sexuality, and the arts. Her poetry challenges us to reconsider the rigid binaries and social constructs that have long governed human relationships. In an era where gender norms and sexual identities are being re-evaluated, Sappho's work feels remarkably prescient. She invites us to see love and desire as complex, multifaceted experiences that can't be easily categorized or pigeonholed. Her work is like an ancient mirror reflecting our own struggles and triumphs, a reminder that the quest for identity and connection is as old as time itself. And then there's the art of poetry itself. Sappho's use of language, her innovative meter, and her ability to distill profound emotion into a few lines have set the bar for lyric poetry ever since. She was a master of the craft, her influence visible in everything from the sonnets of Shakespeare to the confessional poetry of Sylvia Plath. It's a legacy that underscores the timeless nature of her themes, proving that the human heart hasn't changed all that much. even if the world around it has. In the end, Sappho's story is one of both legend and reality, a testament to the enduring power of art to transcend boundaries and speak to the universal human experience. Her poetry, though fragmented, continues to resonate, inviting us to explore the depths of our own humanity and find beauty in the fragments of our existence. As we wrap up this exploration of Sappho's life and legacy, remember that her story is far from over. Her influence continues to ripple through time, shaping the way we understand poetry, passion, and the power of the written word. So, the next time you find yourself pondering the mysteries of love or the power of a well-crafted verse, think of Sappho, the poet from Lesbos whose voice still sings across the ages, reminding us that the more things change, the more they stay the same. What you do when you're born into a family of staunchly practical folks, and you've got the soul of an artist trapped inside you like a firefly in a jar. If you're Vincent van Gogh, you stumble through life like a 19th century Mr. Bean, trying your hand at everything from the art of sermonizing to the art of selling art, before landing on the one thing you're actually meant to do, create art. Born on March 30, 1853, in Zundert, Netherlands, Vincent was the eldest of 6 surviving children in the Van Gogh family. With a father who was a minister and a mother who was all about the family and the home, one might say young Vincent was destined for greatness, or at least for a life of pious stability. Spoiler alert, stability was not in the cards. Now, let's talk family dynamics. The Van Goghs were a tight-knit, God-fearing bunch, which sounds cozy until you realize Vincent was named after his stillborn older brother. Talk about starting life with a bit of a shadow over you. But there's more. Vincent's younger brother Theo was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, and who would later become Vincent's lifelong emotional and financial lifeline. Vincent, meanwhile, was the classic difficult child, the one who brought home art supplies instead of trophies, much to his parents' chagrin. Family gatherings must have been a hoot. Before Vincent ever picked up a paintbrush, he was a connoisseur of career misadventures. First up was art dealing. In 1869, at 16, he landed a gig at the international art dealers Goupil and Sy, thanks to some family connections. It seemed like a nice fit at first. He even got transferred to the London branch in 1873, where he promptly fell in love with his landlady's daughter, Eugenie. When she rejected him, because of course she did, Vincent spiraled into a depression. His work performance tanked, and by 1876 he'd been unceremoniously sacked. Vincent van Gogh, art dealer extraordinaire, was officially out of a job. Next, Vincent tried his hand at teaching. In a classic case of those who can't do teach, he moved to Ramsgate, England, to become an assistant teacher. It's worth noting that this school was more of a haphazard daycare than a prestigious institution. The pay, let's just say it was as thin as his future paint layers. Vincent was neither here nor there about teaching, and soon drifted from this career path too, proving that his knack for painting outside the lines extended to his job choices. A brief stint as a bookstore clerk in Dordrecht followed, but Vincent's heart wasn't in it. He spent more time doodling in the margins of books than actually selling them. It didn't take long before he was out the door again, searching for divine intervention. Which brings us to his most peculiar career choice, preaching. Yes, Vincent van Gogh, man of the cloth. In 1879, he took up a missionary post in the Borinage, a coal mining district in Belgium. Picture it, Vincent, the would-be preacher, living like a pauper amongst miners, giving away his clothes and food to help others. His heart was in the right place, but his sermons, not so much. The church authorities found his methods too extreme and unceremoniously booted him out. Another career, another crash landing. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, wow, Vincent really knew how to pick 'em. But what these misadventures actually did was inch him closer to his true calling. Each failure chipped away at his reluctance to embrace art. It wasn't until 1880, at the age of 27, that Vincent decided to fully commit to being an artist. This wasn't an epiphany so much as a begrudging acceptance of the inevitable. After all, when you've been kicked out of more professions than you can count on both hands, what have you got to lose? Despite, or perhaps because of, these unconventional beginnings, Vincent's art would eventually redefine the world's understanding of beauty and emotion. But before that, he spent years trying to find his place in a world that seemed to reject him at every turn. His story is a testament to the power of perseverance, even if it sometimes feels more like a comedy of errors than a heroic journey. Each stumble, each failure, was a brushstroke on the canvas of his life, leading him ever so slowly to the masterpiece he was destined to create, himself. As Vincent van Gogh edged toward his true calling, he realized it was time to shake the Dutch dust off his boots and head to the city that was the beating heart of the art world, Paris. If you're imagining a romanticized version of this journey, with Vincent gazing wistfully at the Eiffel Tower while sipping cheap wine under a cloudless sky, let me stop you right there. The reality was far more gritty than glamorous. In 1886, Vincent moved in with his brother Theo, who was living in Montmartre, the epicenter of bohemian chaos and artistic innovation. Theo was not just a brother but a lifeline, working as an art dealer and supporting Vincent both financially and emotionally. Without Theo, Vincent might have been as lost as a paintbrush in a haystack. Paris in the 1880 was like the Coachella of the art world, but instead of flower crowns and Instagram influencers, you had painters, poets, and enough absinthe to fuel 1,000 misguided dreams. Vincent found himself in the company of impressionist heavyweights like Claude Monet, Camille Pissarro, and Paul Gauguin. These guys were the rock stars of their day, redefining what art could be with each brushstroke. Vincent, always the eager student, absorbed their techniques with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store, or, in his case, a painter in a pigment shop. Now, here's where we debunk a myth or two. While it's tempting to think these artists lived in a perpetual state of inspiration and joy, the truth was a touch less romantic. The bohemian lifestyle was less about sipping champagne and more about struggling to pay rent. Vincent and his fellow artists often found themselves flat broke, their pockets as empty as their stomachs. Still, they were rich in ambition, if not in francs. For Vincent, who was used to financial instability, this was just another day at the office. Living in Montmartre was like living inside a kaleidoscope. The area was a riot of colors, sounds, and smells, which suited Vincent just fine. It was here that he began to shake off the somber tones of his earlier works and embrace a brighter palette. His paintings from this period, like the Seine with the Pont de la Grande Jet and Boulevard de Clichy, are bursting with color and energy, capturing the vibrancy of Parisian life. It was as if Vincent had finally found the volume knob on his emotions and turned it up to 11. Amidst all this creative chaos, Vincent formed some quirky friendships that shaped his evolving style. Take Henry de Toulouse-Lautrec, for instance, the pint-sized party animal with a penchant for the nightlife. Lautrec introduced Vincent to the lively café culture of Paris, where artists, writers, and other assorted eccentrics gathered to debate, drink, and occasionally throw punches. Vincent, who was as socially awkward as they come, found solace in these gatherings, where his oddities were not only accepted but celebrated. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the empty wallet. Despite rubbing elbows with the who's who of the art world, Vincent was perpetually strapped for cash. This was partly due to his refusal to compromise his artistic vision for commercial success. He was like the indie filmmaker who refuses to put explosions in his movie, even if it means a blockbuster flop. Vincent's paintings, with their bold colors and emotional intensity, didn't exactly scream, "Buy me," to the art patrons of the day, who were more interested in landscapes that matched their drapes. Vincent's financial woes were compounded by his penchant for spending what little he had on art supplies. While his contemporaries might have splurged on a new suit or a night out, Vincent invested in paint and canvas, the tools of his trade. It's said that he often skipped meals to afford supplies, a classic case of starving artist syndrome. Yet, for Vincent, creating art was as essential as eating. He once wrote to Theo, "I am seeking, I am striving, I am in it with all my heart." And he wasn't kidding. In Paris, Vincent's work began to evolve in ways he could never have imagined. He dabbled in the pointillist technique, inspired by Georges Seurat's precise darts of color, and experimented with Japanese woodblock prints, which influenced the composition and perspective of his paintings. Vincent was like a sponge, soaking up every bit of artistic knowledge he could find and squeezing it onto his canvases in vibrant, swirling patterns. Despite the challenges, Vincent's time in Paris was a period of tremendous growth. He was like a butterfly emerging from a very colorful chrysalis, ready to spread his wings. But even as his art flourished, his personal life remained as tumultuous as ever. Vincent's relationships were often fraught with tension, and his mental health was a constant battle. Yet, throughout it all, his passion for art never wavered. As we wrap up this chapter of Vincent's life, it's important to remember that his story is one of contrasts. The artist who painted in vivid colors while living in shades of grey. His Parisian escapades were a mix of inspiration and desperation, a vivid testament to the power of creativity in the face of adversity. And while Vincent's journey was far from over, his time in Paris laid the foundation for the masterpieces yet to come. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the legend and reality of Vincent van Gogh. Because if you think things have been colorful so far, you haven't seen anything yet. As Vincent packed his bags and bid adieu to the frenetic energy of Paris, he set his sights on Arles, a sleepy town in the south of France. If Paris was a kaleidoscope, Arles was a paint-by-numbers kit, waiting for someone to go wild outside the lines. Vincent arrived in February 1888 with visions of sunflowers dancing in his head, and a mission to capture the blazing colors of the Provençal countryside. It was here that Vincent's palette exploded like confetti at a New Year's Eve party, only with more yellow. So much yellow, in fact, that it could make a daffodil feel underdressed. Now, if you're picturing Vincent as a solitary genius wandering through fields of lavender, let's pump the brakes on that romantic image. Sure, he was a genius, but solitary. Not quite. Vincent had a plan that involved more than just painting pretty pictures. He dreamed of establishing an artist's community, a sort of creative commune where like-minded souls could live, work, and maybe argue over who used the last of the cadmium yellow. The centerpiece of this vision was the Yellow House, a small, two-story building that Vincent rented for 15 francs a month. It was a steal, even by 19th century standards. Living in the Yellow House was idyllic in theory, but challenging in practice. Vincent painted feverishly, producing over 200 paintings in just 15 months, including some of his most iconic works like Sunflowers and The Bedroom. These masterpieces weren't just exercises in color theory. They were Vincent's way of trying to capture the very essence of Arles, a place where the light seemed to glow from within, as if someone had switched on a divine spotlight. His brushstrokes became more vigorous, his colors more saturated, as if he were trying to bottle the sun itself. But Vincent's artistic endeavors weren't all sun and roses. The financial burden of the Yellow House, coupled with the cost of art supplies, was enough to make a lesser artist throw in the towel, or at least the paintbrush. Fortunately, Vincent had Theo, who continued to support his brother despite the ever-mounting expenses. Theo, bless his supportive soul, was the glue holding Vincent's precarious life together, even from afar. Enter Paul Gauguin, stage left. Gauguin was the friend who could either turn your party into a legendary affair or burn the house down, sometimes both. Vincent and Gauguin had met in Paris, where they bonded over their shared disdain for artistic conventions and a mutual love of bold colors. Gauguin, with his adventurous spirit and penchant for drama, was the perfect candidate for Vincent's artist's utopia. So, in October 1888, after much cajoling and financial incentives from Theo, Gauguin arrived in Arles. The partnership between Vincent and Gauguin was like a firework, dazzling but destined to explode. Initially, they inspired each other, pushing boundaries and challenging one another's artistic sensibilities. But as often happens when two strong personalities are confined to a small space, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Vincent's relentless work ethic clashed with Gauguin's more laid-back approach, leading to disagreements over everything from artistic techniques to household chores. Picture an episode of The Odd Couple, but with more existential angst and fewer laugh tracks. The infamous ear incident, the stuff of tabloid legend, was the climax of their tumultuous relationship. On December 23, 1888, after a particularly heated argument, Gauguin stormed out of the Yellow House. In a fit of despair, Vincent took a razor to his left ear, cutting off a portion and wrapping it in a piece of paper like a macabre Christmas present. He then delivered it to a local brothel, giving new meaning to the phrase, artistic offering. It was a shocking act, one that has been dissected and debated by historians and psychologists alike. Why Vincent did it remains a mystery, but it's clear that his mental health was as fragile as the paint on his canvases. Contrary to the myth of the tortured, isolated artist, Vincent's life in Arles was a complex tapestry of human connection and conflict. His relationship with Gogh was simultaneously a source of inspiration and tension, a testament to the messy reality of creative partnerships. The Yellow House wasn't just a studio. It was a crucible where artistic dreams collided with personal demons, resulting in a body of work that would leave an indelible mark on the art world. Despite, or perhaps because of, the chaos, Vincent's time in Arles was incredibly productive. His paintings from this period are a riot of color and emotion, each one a visceral expression of his internal world. Works like Starry Night over the Rhone and Café Terrace at Night capture the magic of the Provençal night sky, while his series of sunflower paintings exude a vibrancy that defies the darkness that often surrounded him. Yet, the myth of the solitary genius persists, overshadowing the reality of Vincent's life. He wasn't an island, but a magnet for both camaraderie and conflict. His desire to connect with other artists was as intense as his passion for painting, but his fiery temperament often got in the way. Vincent's story is a poignant reminder that creativity doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's shaped by the people and places that surround us, for better or worse. As Vincent recovered from the ear incident, he faced a new reality. Gogh had left Arles, and Vincent was alone once more, grappling with the fallout of his actions and the increasing instability of his mental health. But even in the midst of turmoil, his dedication to his craft never wavered. Painting was both his salvation and his curse, a relentless pursuit that demanded everything he had to give. As we leave Vincent in the Yellow House, it's clear that his journey is far from over. The next chapter of his life would take him to new places and deeper struggles, but also to new heights of artistic achievement. Vincent van Gogh's story is one of contradictions, a life marked by both isolation and connection, despair and beauty. It's a story that continues to captivate us, reminding us that art is not just a reflection of life, but a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in Vincent's extraordinary tale. As Vincent van Gogh packed up his dreams of an artist commune and left the Yellow House in Arles, he embarked on a new chapter that would take him into the depths of his own mind and the halls of an asylum. On May 8, 1889, Vincent was admitted to the Saint Paul de Morsol Asylum in Seine-Trémy-de-Provence. A picturesque location that offered anything but a picturesque experience, was a decision fueled by the aftermath of the infamous ear incident and a recognition that his mental health needed more than just a new canvas to fix. Now, let's set the scene. St. Paul de Morsol was a former monastery turned asylum, nestled amid lavender fields and olive groves. It sounds charming, right? But don't get carried away with visions of a peaceful retreat. The reality was a bit more Shutter Island meets Mediterranean day spa. While the setting was tranquil, the conditions inside were anything but. The asylum had a reputation for treating its patients with methods that would make modern psychiatrists wince. We're talking hydrotherapy baths that were less about relaxation and more about shock value. For Vincent, the transition to asylum life was a mixed bag of paint tubes and existential dread. On one hand, he was grappling with the demons of his mind, the hallucinations, paranoia, and crippling depression. On the other hand, he now had the time and space to focus solely on his art, away from the pressures of the outside world. The asylum's director, Dr. Théophile Péron, allowed Vincent to use a spare room as his studio. This was a lifeline for Vincent, whose need to create was as essential as the air he breathed. If you think about it, Vincent's time at Seine-Trémy was both ironic and tragic. Here was a man battling severe mental illness, yet producing some of his most celebrated works. It was during this period that he painted The Starry Night, that swirling masterpiece of cosmic chaos that seems to pulse with Vincent's inner turmoil. The painting, now housed in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, wasn't just a depiction of the night sky from his window. It was an outpouring of emotion, a visual symphony of his inner turbulence. Vincent's days at the asylum were structured, yet surreal. He followed a routine that included prescribed treatments, daily walks in the garden, and of course, painting. Lots of painting. In fact, between May 1889 and May 1890, Vincent created around 150 canvases, not to mention countless sketches and drawings. Talk about productivity. If only the rest of us could channel our stress into such prolific creativity. But here's the kicker. Despite his relentless output, Vincent's work was still largely unrecognized by the art world. Imagine churning out one masterpiece after another, only to have them languish in obscurity. It's like being in a rock band that only plays in your mom's garage. Economic realities were ever present, even in the asylum. Vincent's brother, Theo, continued to support him financially, sending money and art supplies to sustain his brother's artistic endeavors. The cost of Vincent's stay at Saint-Trémy was roughly 50 francs a day, not a small sum considering Theo's own financial struggles. Yet Theo never wavered in his support, understanding that art was Vincent's lifeline, even more vital than the bread on his table. But let's not gloss over the hardship. Life in the asylum wasn't all sunflowers and starry nights. Vincent's mental health was a roller coaster, with brief periods of lucidity followed by debilitating episodes. He described these episodes as attacks that left him feeling as if he were a bird in a cage. It was during these times that his art became a refuge, a way to channel his pain into something tangible. In a letter to Theo, Vincent wrote, "The sight of the stars always makes me dream." And dream he did, translating those visions into vivid colors and bold strokes. In many ways, Vincent's time at Saint-Trémy was a testament to the dual nature of creativity, a gift and a curse, a source of both solace and suffering. His works from this period reflect an artist at war with himself, painting as if each piece could exorcise his inner demons. The irony is palpable. The more unstable Vincent's mind became, the more brilliant his art. It's a narrative that romanticizes the tortured genius trope, yet beneath the myth lies a harsh reality. The cost of such brilliance was immeasurable. Despite the challenges, Vincent found moments of beauty in the midst of chaos. He painted the asylum's gardens, the surrounding countryside, and even the fields visible from his barred window. His works like Irises and the wheat field are imbued with a vibrancy that belies the pain he endured. These paintings weren't just pretty pictures. They were Vincent's way of connecting with the world, of finding meaning amidst the madness. Vincent's correspondence with Theo during this time reveals a mind that was as introspective as it was creative. He mused on the nature of suffering, the role of art, and his own place in the universe. These letters, filled with philosophical ponderings and bursts of artistic insight, are as much a part of Vincent's legacy as his paintings. They offer a window into the soul of a man who, despite his struggles, never lost his passion for art or his love for his brother. As we pause in Vincent's story, it's clear that his time at Saint-Trémy was a period of profound transformation. It was here that he honed his vision, crafting works that would become cornerstones of modern art. Yet it was also a time of profound loneliness and despair, a reminder that genius often walks hand in hand with suffering. Vincent van Gogh's journey was far from over, but his time in the asylum marked a pivotal chapter in his life, a chapter that continues to resonate with anyone who has ever grappled with the complexities of the human condition. So, as we leave Vincent in the halls of St. Paul de Morsol, painting furiously amidst the shadows of his mind, remember, this isn't just a story about art. It's a story about the unyielding spirit of a man who, despite the odds, found a way to illuminate the darkness with the brilliance of his soul. Stay tuned, because there's more to come in this roller coaster of creativity and chaos. As Vincent van Gogh found himself in the tranquil yet confining halls of St. Paul de Morsol, it became clear that his story was far from over. With his stint at the asylum offering both respite and creative fervor, Vincent's journey took another turn in May 1890 as he moved to Auvers-sur-Oise, a quaint town just a stone's throw from Paris. The move was orchestrated by Theo, ever the supportive brother, who hoped that the change of scenery and proximity to the capital might stabilize Vincent's health and boost his spirits. Auvers, with its picturesque landscape and burgeoning artist community, seemed like the perfect setting for Vincent to recalibrate. Enter Dr. Paul Gachet, a homeopathic physician with a penchant for art and a bedside manner as eccentric as Vincent's brushstrokes. If you're imagining the good doctor as a Victorian-era doctor, House, you'd be spot on, minus the sarcasm, but with extra doses of absinthe. Gachet, who was more Vincent's confidant than his clinician, shared his patient's passion for art, offering both medical advice and friendship. And let's be honest, Gachet's prescription likely included more paint than pills, a fact evident in the numerous portraits Vincent painted of him, including the famous portrait of Dr. Gachet, which would later become one of the most expensive paintings ever sold, fetching $82, $5 million at auction in 1990. Over Cyrus was a hive of artistic activity, and Vincent, ever the eager bee, buzzed around it with unbridled energy. In just 70 days, he produced over 70 paintings, a remarkable feat by any standard. Works like Wheatfield with Crows and The Church at Overs showcase Vincent's evolving style, with their swirling skies and vibrant, almost rebellious colors. These paintings seem to capture the raw emotion and intensity of a man who was both racing against time and trying to outrun his inner demons. Yet despite this prolific output, Vincent's life remained a precarious balancing act. His mental health was a roller coaster, with moments of clarity quickly overshadowed by bouts of despair. The socio-economic realities of the time didn't help either. The art market of the late 19th century wasn't exactly clamoring for Vincent's avant-garde style. His paintings were a bit too bold, too raw, for the tastes of the bourgeoisie, who preferred their art like their tea, refined, and not too strong. Vincent sold only one painting during his lifetime, The Red Vineyard, for 400 francs. That's about $500 today. Not exactly a windfall when you're trying to live and fund a relentless passion for painting. On July 27, 1890, Vincent van Gogh took a walk into a wheat field and shot himself in the chest. It was a tragic end, one that has been romanticized to the point of distortion. Let's cut through the myth. Vincent wasn't just a tortured genius who couldn't handle his own creativity. He was a man battling profound mental illness in an age that saw such struggles as a moral failing rather than a medical condition. He survived for 2 days after the incident, passing away in the arms of his brother Theo on July 29, 1890. His last words, "La tristesse dura toujours." The sadness will last forever. A haunting sentiment, but one that underscores the depth of his suffering. After Vincent's death, Theo, heartbroken and plagued by illness, passed away just 6 months later. The two brothers, whose relationship had been the backbone of Vincent's life, were buried side by side in Overs. But even in death, Vincent's story was only just beginning. As the art world began to shift, moving away from the rigid traditions of the past, Vincent's work started to gain recognition. It was the dawn of modern art, and Vincent's bold colors and emotive brushstrokes were suddenly in vogue. Enter Johanna van Gogh, Theo's widow and the unsung hero of Vincent's posthumous rise. Johanna, recognizing the genius of her brother-in-law, tirelessly promoted his work, compiling his letters and organizing exhibitions. She was the PR powerhouse Vincent never had in life, a one-woman campaign to ensure that the world saw what she and Theo had always known, that Vincent was a visionary. Thanks to her efforts, Vincent's reputation grew, and by the early 20th century, he was hailed as a pioneer of modern art. Today, Vincent van Gogh is a cultural icon, his life the subject of movies, books, and even a song or two. But as we celebrate his legacy, it's essential to remember the man behind the myth. Vincent wasn't just the poster child for the tortured artist. He was a complex individual whose struggles with mental health and rejection didn't define him, but rather fueled his extraordinary creativity. His art continues to resonate because it speaks to the universal human experience, the beauty and chaos of existence, the light and shadow of the soul. In examining Vincent's life, we also see the socio-economic realities that contributed to his obscurity during his lifetime. The art market of the 19th century was a closed shop, favoring those who played by the rules. Vincent, with his refusal to conform and his relentless pursuit of artistic truth, was always going to be an outsider. Yet it's precisely this outsider status that has endeared him to generations of art lovers. In a world obsessed with fitting in, Vincent's story reminds us of the power of authenticity. As we wrap up Vincent's tale, let's leave behind the romanticized narrative and honor the reality. Vincent van Gogh was a man who painted not for fame or fortune, but because he had to. His canvases were his letters to the world, each one an invitation to see through his eyes. And in the end, that's what makes his legacy so enduring. Vincent's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, creativity can be a beacon of hope. As long as there are stars in the night sky and sunflowers in the fields, Vincent van Gogh will continue to inspire, a vibrant legacy etched in paint and passion. If you've ever wondered what it's like to grow up in a household where music is both a blessing and a curse, look no further than young Ludwig van Beethoven's life in Barn, Germany. Born in December 1770, amid the flickering candlelight of a Europe caught in the slow-motion wreck of the Holy Roman Empire, Beethoven was destined for greatness, or so his father, Johann, hoped. Johann van Beethoven was a man who could turn a lullaby into a lecture on discipline. With all the nurturing warmth of a snowball, Johann was determined to mold Ludwig into the next Mozart, whether the boy liked it or not. Barn, sitting pretty on the banks of the Rhine, was a city that knew how to balance the arts with a touch of political melodrama. It was a time when the Holy Roman Empire was staggering along like a historical heavyweight past its prime. Empire was a sprawling patchwork of small states, each with its own ruler and about as organized as a sark drawer. Yet, it was against this backdrop that Beethoven's early influences took shape. Johann van Beethoven, a singer and music teacher, had a reputation in Barn that was as mixed as a Beethoven symphony. He was part of the court chapel at the Elector of Cologne's residence, which sounds prestigious until you realize that the job was as secure as a house of cards. Johann was known for his ability to teach music and his equal talent for drinking away his earnings. He believed in a strict regimen for young Ludwig, who was forced to practice the clavier for hours on end. Neighbors reportedly saw the young prodigy, barely able to reach the keys, teetering on the bench like a pint-sized virtuoso, driven by a father's relentless ambition. It didn't help that Ludwig's grandfather, Kapellmeister Ludwig van Beethoven, after whom he was named, was something of a local legend. The elder Beethoven had set the bar high as a respected musician in Barn, and Johann was desperate for his son to leap over it. But the pressure wasn't just familial. In the late 18th century, Europe was an orchestra of political tension, with countries like France and Austria playing the timpani of revolution and reform. In such a world, music wasn't just an art. It was a statement, a passport, and sometimes a lifeline. Young Ludwig's upbringing was a blend of rigorous musical training and the kind of childhood stories that make you question the romanticized image of prodigies. His first music teacher was his father, though that might be better described as musical boot camp. Later, he received lessons from Christian Gottlob Neef, a man who recognized Beethoven's genius and became a significant influence. Neef introduced him to the works of Bach and taught him composition, igniting a creative spark that even Johann couldn't extinguish with his rigid methods. Despite the domestic tempest, Beethoven's talent was undeniable. By the age of 11, he was serving as Neef's assistant at the court chapel. By 12, he had published his first composition, a set of keyboard variations that hinted at the extraordinary talent developing beneath the surface. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't all rainbows and Mozart concertos. Beethoven's early works, like any good teenagers, had their rough edges and rebellious streaks. Yet they were the foundation of a legacy that would redefine music. The political scene in Europe was like a game of chess where everyone was playing by different rules. The Holy Roman Empire, which had been around since 962, was finally showing its age. It was a time of enlightenment, revolutions, and an economic landscape as unpredictable as Johann's mood after a few drinks. The French Revolution was just a few years away, and the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity were starting to echo across the Rhine. Beethoven, whether he realized it or not, was soaking up these ideas like a sponge. His music would eventually reflect the turbulence and triumphs of his era. But for now, he was a young boy with a keyboard and a head full of notes, trying to navigate a world that was changing faster than his fingers could play. In a household where the metronome ticked louder than laughter, Beethoven learned to channel his frustrations into his music. His early compositions were marked by a raw intensity that would become his signature. But beneath the stern exterior crafted by his father lay a sensitive soul, attuned to the beauty and chaos of the world around him. As Europe danced on the brink of revolution, Beethoven was composing the soundtrack, note by painstaking note. So there you have it, a young genius in the making, shaped by a father's ambition, a mentor's guidance, and the ever-shifting symphony of a continent in flux. Beethoven's early life in Barn was a prelude to the monumental compositions that would follow, each piece a testament to a boy who turned the cacophony of his upbringing into a harmonious legacy. And just like that, the stage was set for Beethoven to leave Barn and venture into the wider world, where his music would resonate with a humanity searching for meaning amid the madness. And so, with a head full of melodies and a heart brimming with ambition, young Ludwig van Beethoven packed his bags and set his sights on Vienna in 1792. Now, Vienna wasn't just any city. It was the epicenter of musical brilliance, where composers were as common as coffee cups and equally vital to the city's robust culture. Imagine a place where the air was thick with the notes of symphonies, and every salon had its own virtuoso. This was Beethoven's new playground, a city alive with the spirit of the Enlightenment and the whispers of revolution. Beethoven's arrival in Vienna was a bit like throwing a cat into a room full of rocking chairs. There was potential for chaos, but also for extraordinary movement. He quickly found himself under the tutelage of the great Joseph Haydn. Now, if you're imagining a heartwarming mentor-protege relationship, think again. Their dynamic was less Yoda and Luke Skywalker and more Felix and Oscar from the Odd Couple. Haydn was the established maestro, a man of tradition and refinement, while Beethoven was the brash newcomer, ready to challenge conventions and maybe break a few rules along the way. Their lessons were as harmonious as they were tumultuous. Haydn, known as the father of the symphony, was a stickler for structure and form. Beethoven, meanwhile, was like a musical Jackson Pollock, flinging notes onto the page with reckless abandon. Haydn once quipped that Beethoven had learned a lot, but still has much to learn. There was mutual respect, but their relationship was marked by friction as Beethoven's burgeoning style began to outgrow Haydn's conservative guidance. But let's not get too caught up in the soap opera of teacher-student relationships. Beethoven was making waves in Vienna, and it didn't take long for people to notice. By 1795, he had performed his first public concert in the city, featuring his own piano Concerto No. 2 in B-flat major. It was a hit, and the city buzzed with the name Beethoven, like a catchy tune you couldn't get out of your head. Of course, life wasn't all standing ovations and encore requests. By 1798, Beethoven began to notice a slight ringing in his ears, a cruel irony for a man whose very existence was symbiotically tied to sound. Initially, he brushed it off, much like we ignore that strange noise our car makes until the check engine light comes on. But the ringing grew louder, a persistent intruder in the symphony of his mind. And then there were Beethoven's quirks. Oh, the quirks. The man was a walking catalogue of eccentricity, from his love of strong coffee, 60 beans per cup, no less, to his habit of pouring cold water over his hands before playing the piano, convinced it stimulated his fingers. He was notorious for his unkempt appearance, often wandering Vienna's streets looking like he'd just rolled out of bed, which, to be fair, was sometimes true. In an era when powdered wigs and polished shoes were the norm, Beethoven was a bit of a sartorial anarchist. Socially, Beethoven was as awkward as a giraffe on roller skates. He struggled with polite conversation, preferring the company of his compositions to cocktail chatter. His bluntness and temper were legendary, and he wasn't afraid to speak his mind, whether it was appropriate or not. This didn't win him many friends in high society, but it did earn him a reputation as a man of principle, someone who valued artistic integrity over societal niceties. Yet, for all his social missteps, Beethoven's genius was undeniable. His works from this period, like the Pathétique Sonata, were both a reflection of his inner turmoil and a declaration of his musical prowess. Here was a man who could translate the chaos within into something beautiful, something sublime. His music was a conversation with the universe, and the universe, it seemed, was listening. As Beethoven's star continued to rise, so did the stakes. His hearing loss was progressing, a silent spectre haunting his every note. In a world where music was his language, the prospect of deafness was nothing short of a tragedy. But Beethoven, ever the fighter, wasn't about to let a little thing like losing his hearing stop him. He was already experimenting with new ways to experience music, pressing a wooden stick between his teeth and the piano to feel the vibrations. It was a battle of wills, man against fate, with Beethoven determined to have the last word, or note, as it were. Vienna, for all its charm and cultural vitality, was also a place of political intrigue. The French Revolution had sent shockwaves across Europe, and Austria was no exception. The city was a cauldron of ideas, where discussions of liberty and equality simmered alongside the symphonies. Beethoven, a child of his time, was influenced by these ideas, and they began to seep into his compositions. His music became a reflection of the era's turbulence, a symphonic protest against tyranny, and a celebration of the human spirit. The late 1790 were a pivotal period for Beethoven. He was no longer just the young upstart from Barn, was becoming a force in his own right. His compositions were gaining complexity, moving beyond the strictures of classical form into something new, something daring. Critics and audiences were beginning to see Beethoven not as the student of Haydn, but as a revolutionary in his own right, one who played by his own rules and dared to imagine music as it had never been imagined before. But as we approach the dawn of a new century, Beethoven's story is far from over. The man who turned Vienna on its head with his audacious harmonies and unyielding spirit is about to embark on the next chapter of his tumultuous, brilliant life. The city waits with bated breath, and so do we, for what comes next in the saga of Ludwig van Beethoven. As the curtain rose on the 19th century, Beethoven was poised to redefine music, and himself, forever. Enter the middle period of his career, where the word heroic wasn't just a catchy tagline, it was a way of life. Beethoven's Symphony No. 3 in E-flat major, better known as the Eroica, composed in 1803, represents a seismic shift in musical storytelling. Originally dedicated to Napoleon Bonaparte, the symphony was a musical homage to the ideals of the French Revolution. That is, until Napoleon did the unthinkable and crowned himself emperor. Beethoven, never one to mince words or musical dedications, promptly erased Napoleon's name from the score with the fury of a man who just found out his favorite revolutionary is now a wannabe monarch. The Eroica Symphony was longer and more complex than anything audiences had heard before. Imagine sitting through a symphony that lasts about 50 minutes when most others clocked in at half that. This was Beethoven's way of saying, "Buckle up, Vienna. This is just the beginning." It was bold, defiant, and as layered as a Viennese tort. The symphony's first public performance was met with mixed reviews, some critics clutching their pearls at its audacity. But Beethoven wasn't writing for the critics. He was composing for the future, and history would ultimately side with him. Speaking of Vienna, this city was in a bit of a pickle thanks to the Napoleonic Wars. Picture a cultural hub that had been the beating heart of Europe's music scene, now rattled by military conflict and economic strain. The Napoleonic Wars stretched from 1803 to 1815, and Vienna was smack dab in the middle of the action. The city found itself occupied by French troops not once, but twice during this period. Talk about overstaying your welcome. All this military hubbub meant that Vienna's cultural life was like a piano with a few missing keys, still functional, but lacking its full range. And into this tempest of political chaos and financial uncertainty walked Beethoven. Despite his rising fame, Beethoven's financial situation was as unpredictable as a Viennese waltz. He was caught in a tumultuous dance with patrons who could vanish faster than you could say, economic downturn. Beethoven's works were celebrated, yet his wallet often felt as empty as a concert hall after the final encore. He relied on the support of aristocratic patrons like Prince Lichnowsky and Archduke Rudolph. These relationships were a lifeline, ensuring Beethoven could keep creating even when the economic tides turned against him. The patronage system was the Kickstarter of its day, but with more powdered wigs and less social media buzz. Yet, Beethoven's social skills, or lack thereof, didn't exactly help his financial plight. His temper was as legendary as his compositions. Picture a man who could go from zero to irate faster than a crescendo in one of his symphonies. He was known to argue with friends and patrons alike, his stubbornness a double-edged sword. Beethoven's bluntness often left him friendless at dinner parties, but respected in the world of music. He was a man who could turn a phrase as sharply as he could turn a melody, and he wasn't afraid to use either to make a point. Now, let's debunk the myth of Beethoven as the perpetually tortured artist. Was he beset by personal demons and professional challenges? Absolutely. But he wasn't exactly the brooding, solitary figure that romanticized portraits often depict. Beethoven had friends, and some were as devoted as a loyal metronome. His friendship with Stefan van Breuning, for instance, was a source of personal solace. Breuning was a steady presence in Beethoven's life, offering support that went beyond the financial. Beethoven's circle of friends and patrons provided both camaraderie and a crucial safety net in turbulent times. So, was Beethoven a tortured genius? In part. But he was also a man whose life was filled with moments of laughter, joy, and human connection. He wasn't just composing symphonies. He was composing a complex symphony of life, full of dissonance and harmony alike. The myth of the solitary, suffering artist is a compelling narrative, but the reality is far richer and more nuanced. Beethoven was a genius not because of his suffering, but in spite of it. Amidst this chaos, Beethoven's creativity was as unstoppable as a marching army. He composed some of his most iconic works during this period, such as the Waldstein and Appassionata sonatas. These pieces weren't just music. They were emotional landscapes, each note a step on a journey through Beethoven's inner world. The Appassionata, composed in 1805, is a roller coaster of passion and fury, a testament to Beethoven's ability to channel his struggles into something transcendent. But let's not sugarcoat it. Beethoven's middle period was also characterized by the relentless advance of his hearing loss. By 1802, he had already penned the Heiligenstadt Testament, a heart-wrenching letter to his brothers, where he confessed the despair of his encroaching deafness. It was a document never meant for public eyes, a raw glimpse into a soul wrestling with its own limitations. Yet, even as silence threatened to envelop him, Beethoven found ways to keep the music alive. He used ear trumpets, specially designed hearing aids, and even kept conversations in notebooks when spoken words became too elusive. In the end, Beethoven's middle period was a whirlwind of revolutionary music, personal trials, and the enduring power of human connection. It was a time when his compositions challenged the status quo, much like the political upheavals of his day. In the face of adversity, Beethoven didn't just survive, he thrived, creating works that would echo through the corridors of time, forever altering the landscape of music. As our journey through his life continues, remember that Beethoven's genius was not in his suffering, but in his ability to transform it into something sublime. The story of Ludwig van Beethoven isn't just about a man. It's about the resilience of the human spirit and the music that transcends it all. So, stay tuned, because the symphony of his life is far from over. As the curtain of Beethoven's life draws closer to its dramatic finale, the plot thickens with layers of genius, hardship, and the kind of personal drama that would make a soap opera blush. We're diving headfirst into the later years of his life, where deafness wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was the uninvited guest at every musical gathering. But if you think that Beethoven let a little thing like complete deafness silence him, prepare to be amazed. The man was composing at a level that seemed almost superhuman, creating masterpieces that defied the very nature of sound itself. Let's talk about the Ninth Symphony, composed in 1824, a symphonic behemoth that left audiences stunned and critics scrambling to redefine what music could be. At over an hour long, this wasn't just a piece. It was a marathon with a choir finale that threw tradition out the window and replaced it with a full-throated ode to joy. And here's the kicker. Beethoven was completely deaf by this point. Imagine crafting a symphony so sophisticated that it continues to be dissected by musicologists centuries later, all while you can't hear a single note. It's like painting the Sistine Chapel with your eyes closed. The Ninth Symphony wasn't just about musical innovation. It was a symphonic manifesto on brotherhood and unity, themes that resonated deeply in a Europe still reeling from the Napoleonic Wars. The final movement, with Schiller's poem, was a celebration of humanity that transcended politics and borders. Beethoven was making a statement, loud and clear, even if he couldn't hear it himself. But life wasn't all grand gestures and musical triumphs. Beethoven's personal life was a hotbed of drama that would give any reality TV show a run for its money. Enter the infamous Immortal Beloved Letters, a trilogy of notes that have tantalized historians and romantics alike for years. Written in July 1812, the letters were never sent, but they reveal a heart in turmoil, passionately addressing an unidentified woman with whom Beethoven was hopelessly in love. Was it Antoni Brentano, Josephine Brunswick, or a third mystery woman? The debate rages on like an unsolved episode of history's greatest mysteries. As if unrequited love wasn't complicated enough, Beethoven found himself embroiled in a guardianship battle over his nephew Karl. Picture a custody fight that was less about the child's welfare and more about Beethoven's stubborn sense of family duty. Following his brother Caspar's death in 1815, Beethoven was determined to rescue Karl from what he saw as the clutches of his mother, Johanna, whom he deemed unfit. Beethoven won custody, but the relationship with Karl was rocky, to say the least. The young man attempted suicide in 1826, a tragic culmination of the pressures imposed by his uncle's expectations. Beethoven's guardianship was a mix of misguided love and relentless control, a reminder that genius doesn't always equate to wisdom in personal affairs. In the broader tapestry of Beethoven's life, it's easy to paint him as the solitary genius, hammering away at compositions in a darkened room. But this myth, while romantic, does a disservice to the collaborative spirit that defined his work. Beethoven was no stranger to collaboration, despite his reputation for being pricklier than a hedgehog in a balloon shop. He worked closely with musicians, copyists, and patrons who supported his vision, even when his social skills were as harmonious as a cat in a dog park. His friendships with figures like Anton Skindler, a violinist and self-proclaimed Beethoven expert, provided both camaraderie and practical assistance, such as managing the business side of publishing his works. And let's not forget the economic context of Beethoven's later years. The patronage system that had buoyed his career was crumbling faster than a soggy piece of strudel. The Congress of Vienna in 1815, while politically significant, did little to stabilize the financial landscape for artists. Beethoven, ever the resourceful composer, navigated these choppy waters by selling compositions directly to publishers and securing commissions from European royalty. His financial acumen was as sharp as his musical wit, ensuring he could continue to create even when the economic tides threatened to wash away his security. Despite the challenges, Beethoven's legacy as an innovator who reshaped the musical landscape is undeniable. His late string quartets, composed between 1825 and 1826, are considered some of the most profound pieces in the chamber music repertoire. These works, exploratory and complex, were initially met with bewilderment. Critics and audiences of the time found them as accessible as a cryptic crossword puzzle, yet they are now hailed as masterpieces of introspective depth and structural innovation. As we delve deeper into Beethoven's later years, it's crucial to peel back the layers of myth and examine the man in all his complexity. He was a genius, yes, but he was also a human being grappling with love, loss, and the relentless march of time. Beethoven's story is a symphony of contradictions, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit against the odds. So, as we stand on the brink of his life's final act, remember that the notes he left behind continue to resonate, a timeless echo of a life lived on the edge of silence. Stay tuned, because the crescendo of his legacy is only just beginning. Beethoven's life was the crescendo of a symphony that had defied convention, challenged the norms, and left the world quietly waiting for the final note. As 1827 approached, Beethoven's health was as unpredictable as a Viennese winter. His ailments read like a 19th-century medical journal: liver disease, kidney issues, and a persistent bout of pneumonia, none of which were helped by Vienna's notoriously damp climate. Yet, even as his body betrayed him, his mind remained the fertile ground of genius. Beethoven died on March 26, 1827, at the age of 56. He left this world in a dramatic fashion, befitting a man whose life had been a constant battle between silence and sound. According to reports, because who doesn't love a little dramatic flair, his death was marked by a thunderstorm, and with a final raised fist, he departed as if defying the heavens one last time. It was a fitting exit for a man who had spent his life shaking his fist at fate. Now, you might think death would be the ultimate encore for a life so filled with tumult, but Beethoven's departure set the stage for an extraordinary posthumous performance. His funeral on March 29 was a veritable who's who of Vienna's cultural scene, drawing an estimated 20,000 people. That's right, 20,000 souls gathered to mourn a man who had redefined the very essence of music. Among the mourners was Franz Schubert, who himself would join Beethoven in the afterlife just a year later. It was a spectacle that rivaled the grandest operas, a testament to the profound impact Beethoven had on his contemporaries and the world at large. Beethoven's legacy wasn't just in the notes he left behind, but in the way he changed the game entirely. He straddled the divide between the classical and romantic eras, dragging one into the other with the force of a symphonic hurricane. His compositions were not just music, but emotional narratives that spoke to the human condition, exploring themes of struggle, triumph, and the eternal quest for meaning. While Mozart and Haydn laid the foundations, Beethoven constructed a cathedral of sound that reached for the heavens. Let's not forget his Ninth Symphony, which became the musical equivalent of a universal declaration of human solidarity. The Ode to Joy has since been adopted as an anthem for unity, from the European Union to the Berlin Wall's fall in 1989. Beethoven's music transcended his own deafness, becoming a voice for those who had none and a rallying cry for generations seeking harmony in chaos. It's the stuff of legend, but also a stark reminder that even the greatest minds battle their own demons. In pop culture, Beethoven is everywhere. He's the muse behind countless films. His life a canvas for dramatizations that range from the heartfelt to the hilariously inaccurate. Movies like Immortal Beloved and Copying Beethoven have taken creative liberties, painting him as a tortured, brilliant soul, a narrative that sells tickets even if it occasionally strays from the truth. And let's not forget the Beethoven memes that proliferate the internet, a modern homage to his enduring influence. Who knew a 19th century composer could be so meme-worthy? But let's debunk a few myths while we're here. Beethoven wasn't some reclusive savant isolated in a world of notes. He was a social creature, albeit a prickly one, whose interactions with patrons, friends, and fellow musicians were as complicated as his compositions. His financial struggles were real, a constant dance between creativity and survival that resonates with artists even today. Beethoven's life was a testament to the notion that genius is often accompanied by human frailty, a duality that makes his story all the more compelling. So, what's the takeaway from the life of Ludwig van Beethoven? Well, it's that brilliance often comes with a side of chaos. His ability to transform personal adversity into universal beauty is a lesson in resilience. Beethoven didn't just compose music. He composed a narrative of human triumph over silence. His work continues to inspire, reminding us that the echoes of greatness linger long after the final note has been played. In the end, Beethoven was more than just a musician. He was a revolutionary, a man who took the world by storm with nothing more than a piano and a head full of melodies. His impact on music and culture is immeasurable, a legacy that, much like his symphonies, never truly ends. As we close the book on Ludwig van Beethoven, remember that his story is not just one of notes and rhythms, but of the indomitable human spirit. And in a world that often feels like it's teetering on the edge of chaos, that's a legacy worth celebrating. In the grand arena of ancient China, where emperors strutted like peacocks and the fate of millions hung by a thread, the stage was set for a colossal shift. Picture the Qin Dynasty, that brief yet intense candle burning at both ends, finally flickering out in 206 BC. Qin Shi Huang, the man who thought he could micromanage an empire into submission, had exited the scene, leaving behind a mess. His great wall might have been a no-entry sign large enough to be seen from space, but his empire couldn't keep itself together. Enter Liu Bang, a man with all the hallmarks of a classic underdog, no noble blood, but plenty of street smarts. Now, Liu Bang wasn't your typical rags-to-riches story. He was more of a chaos-to-crown kind of guy. As a former peasant and minor official, he had about as much in common with Qin Shi Huang as a dumpling does with a dragon. But where the Qin had relied on brute force and legalist iron fists to enforce order, Liu Bang relied on his uncanny ability to read the chaos like a seasoned poker player can read a bluff. The fall of the Qin dynasty was more than just a political hiccup. It was a full-blown identity crisis for the Middle Kingdom. Qin Shi Huang's death left a power vacuum bigger than any Black Friday sale. His successors, unable to keep a lid on the boiling pot of rebellion, found themselves overrun by insurgents faster than you can say mandate of heaven. The people were fed up with harsh laws and heavy taxes, two things as popular as a soggy fortune cookie. And when people are fed up, they don't just grumble, they rise. Enter Liu Bang, stage left. The transition from the Qin to the Han was akin to swapping a dictatorship for a democracy, though let's not kid ourselves, it was still very much an empire. Liu Bang, who would be known by his temple name as Emperor Geazu, was no stranger to the battlefield. The man knew how to throw down. His most notable showdown, the Battle of Gaixia in 202 BC, where he squared off against Xiang Yu, another claimant to the throne, and a rival who made Julius Caesar's enemies look like playground bullies. Despite being outnumbered, Liu Bang and his forces sang, literally, a victory tune that echoed across the plains, demoralizing Xiang Yu's troops and sealing the deal for the Han Dynasty. Let's talk numbers for a second. The Han Dynasty lasted over 4 centuries, from 206 BC to 220 AD, making it one of the longest lasting in Chinese history. That's over 400 years of trying to keep the empire from toppling over like a Jenga tower. Liu Bang's early reign, however, was less about stability and more about survival. The economic challenges he faced were as daunting as trying to balance a budget with monopoly money. The transition from Qin to Han was not just a political shift, it was an economic overhaul. The Qin's heavy tax burden had left the treasury emptier than a fortune cookie factory after a busy week. But Liu Bang, ever the pragmatic ruler, was not about to let the empire crumble under financial strain. He cut taxes, reduced forced labor, and even returned land to peasants, which was a move about as popular as free ice cream on a hot day. These early economic reforms laid the foundation for what would become one of China's most prosperous eras. Of course, Liu Bang's rise was not without its mythic embellishments. The romantic narrative paints him as a Robin Hood-esque figure, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. But let's not forget, he was as much a political operator as a grassroots hero. His alliances were often as fleeting as the morning mist, with backroom deals and strategic marriages playing a significant role in his consolidation of power. He knew how to play the game, and play it he did, with the kind of cunning that would make a Machiavellian prince tip his hat. In the broader context, the Han Dynasty's emergence was a pivotal moment in Chinese history. It wasn't just about one man's rise to power. It was about the evolution of an empire that would influence cultures and civilizations far beyond its borders. The Han era saw the opening of the Silk Road, which would become the superhighway of ancient trade, linking China to the Roman Empire and beyond. It was during this time that China truly began to engage with the wider world, trading silk for silver and ideas for innovations. But before we get lost in the golden glow of the Han's later achievements, it's crucial to remember that Liu Bang's early reign was a testament to resilience in the face of adversity. His ability to navigate the treacherous waters of political maneuvering and economic restructuring was nothing short of miraculous. And yet, for all his accomplishments, Liu Bang remained a man of pragmatic simplicity, reportedly dismissing the elaborate rituals of the Qin court in favor of more straightforward governance. He was a ruler who never forgot his roots, a peasant at heart with an emperor's crown. In essence, the birth of the Han Dynasty was a testament to the power of adaptability and the art of survival. Liu Bang's journey from commoner to emperor was not just a personal triumph. It was a narrative that reshaped the story of China itself. As we peel back the layers of myth and legend, we're left with the real story, a tale of grit, wit, and a healthy dose of political savvy. The Han Dynasty was born not in the comfort of palaces, but in the crucible of conflict and the struggle for a better future. And if that isn't a story worth telling, I don't know what is. As the Han Dynasty settled into its proverbial throne, what came next was a tale of bureaucratic brilliance and political intrigue that would make even the most seasoned Game of Thrones fans sit up and take notes. Fast forward a bit, past a few emperors who kept the ship afloat, and we arrive at the reign of Emperor Wu, or Wu of Han, the man who ruled from 141 to 87 BC and took the Han Dynasty to its zenith faster than you can say Silk Road. Emperor Wu wasn't just another guy with a fancy hat and a penchant for dragon motifs. Nope, this dude was a reformer with a vision. Think Steve Jobs in a silk robe. His mission: to centralize the government and make the empire as efficient as a well-oiled machine. And how did he do it? By turning Confucianism from a quaint philosophical footnote into the empire's guiding star. Confucianism, with its emphasis on hierarchy, duty, and moral rectitude, was like the ancient version of corporate culture, minus the awkward team-building exercises. Under Wu, Confucianism wasn't just a set of ideas. It was practically the empire's operating system. He established the Imperial University in 124 BC, which was like the Ivy League of ancient China, but with a lot more scrolls and a lot less keg parties. This was where the brightest minds came to study the Confucian classics, preparing for civil service exams that were less about choosing the right answer and more about demonstrating your ability to spew Confucian wisdom like a philosophical fountain. Let's talk about these civil service exams for a moment. They were the ancient equivalent of the SATs, but with a twist. Passing them didn't just get you into college. It got you a job for life. Imagine knowing that acing a test meant you could skip the soul-crushing job hunt and head straight for a cushy government gig. No wonder people studied like their lives depended on it, because, well, they sort of did. But Emperor Wu was no mere pencil pusher. He had grand designs and an empire-sized to-do list. One of his top priorities was to fill the imperial coffers, because an empire doesn't run on hopes and dreams alone. It needs cold, hard cash. So, Wu got creative. He instituted the state monopoly on salt and iron, which sounds duller than dishwater, but was actually a stroke of economic genius. These commodities were the ancient world's equivalent of iPhones and Teslas. Everyone wanted them, and Wu made sure the profits flowed straight into the treasury. Now, let's not romanticize Wu as some benevolent bureaucrat. The man had a ruthless streak that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. His economic reforms were as much about consolidating power as they were about economic stability. By controlling essential goods, he could keep the provinces in check and the local lords from getting any funny ideas about independence. It was like playing a game of Monopoly where Wu held all the railroads and utilities, and everyone else was just trying to pass go without going bankrupt. But every coin has two sides, and while Wu's reign is often painted as a golden age, it wasn't all sunshine and silk robes. The mythic narrative of a perfectly harmonious Confucian utopia glosses over some harsh realities. For one, the taxes imposed to fund Wu's military campaigns were about as popular as a lead balloon. And speaking of military campaigns, Wu's expansionist policies stretched the empire to its limits, both geographically and financially. Wu's reign was marked by aggressive territorial expansion, pushing the empire's borders further than ever before. He sent expeditions into the northern steppes, southern jungles, and even towards the mysterious west, regions that, quite frankly, weren't sending him any postcards. This was the era when the Silk Road really kicked into high gear, becoming the superhighway of trade and culture that linked China with lands as far-flung as Rome. But here's the rub. With great expansion came great responsibility and a hefty price tag. Maintaining far-flung outposts required funds and manpower, and often the returns were less than spectacular. The economic strain of these conquests was a reality that Wu's grand narrative tends to gloss over, much like an Instagram influencer skipping the part where they eat ramen for a month to afford that trip to Bali. So, while Wu's reign is hailed as a golden age, it's crucial to remember that gold often comes mixed with grit. The Confucian state ideology that Wu championed was as much about control as it was about moral integrity. The civil service exams, while revolutionary, also entrenched a bureaucratic elite that could be as inflexible as they were learned. And the economic reforms, though brilliant, were a double-edged sword, filling the coffers even as they drained the provinces. In essence, Emperor Wu's legacy is a testament to the complex dance between vision and reality, ambition and pragmatism. His reign was a pivotal chapter in the story of the Han Dynasty, setting the stage for an empire that would influence the world long after his death. Yet, as with all great stories, it's the nuances and contradictions that make it truly fascinating. And so, as we continue to unravel the threads of this remarkable era, let's remember that history, much like life, is rarely black and white. It's a vibrant tapestry woven from the threads of both legend and truth. As the Han Dynasty rode the wave of Emperor Wu's ambitions, the empire expanded faster than a waistline during holiday season. The Silk Road, which opened its metaphorical gates in 130 BC, was no quaint country lane. It was the ancient world's autobahn, stretching over 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean. This was where silk, spices, jewels, and ideas swapped hands faster than a heart potato at a summer picnic. The Silk Road wasn't just a trade route. It was a cultural superhighway that turned China into the ancient equivalent of a global influencer. You could almost hear the ancient marketing tagline, "Made in China," and proud of it. Now, let's not get carried away with the romantic notion of camel caravans serenely crossing the desert under a starry sky. The reality was more like a logistical nightmare that would make any modern-day supply chain manager break out in a cold sweat. Imagine maintaining this colossal trade network with all its bandits, hostile territories, and the occasional desert storm that could whip sand into places you didn't even know sand could reach. And yet, despite these challenges, the Silk Road thrived, transforming China into a bustling hub of commerce and culture. But hold on, because no expansion comes without its hangovers. Emperor Wu's military campaigns weren't just about playing risk with real territories. They were costly affairs, draining the imperial coffers faster than you can say, tax hike. These campaigns stretched the empire's resources thin, much like attempting to butter toast with one measly pat of butter. The Han Dynasty's borders ballooned to include parts of modern-day Korea, Vietnam, and Central Asia. Each new conquest brought with it the daunting task of governance, defense, and integration, a job that would challenge even the most seasoned bureaucrats. One of the thorniest issues was dealing with the Xiongnu, the nomadic confederation that roamed the steppes north of China. These guys were the original masters of guerrilla warfare, riding swift horses and launching surprise raids that would make even the swiftest supply lines look sluggish. Dealing with the Xiongnu was less about direct confrontation and more about playing an elaborate game of diplomatic chess. The Han's approach was two-pronged, carrots and sticks, or in this case, silk and spears. On the one hand, the Han Dynasty tried to buy peace with lavish gifts and strategic marriages, a sort of ancient version of let's hug it out. On the other hand, they weren't afraid to flex their military muscles when necessary, launching campaigns that were as much about showing strength as they were about achieving lasting victories. The Xiongnu, in turn, saw these negotiations as opportunities to gain wealth without the hassle of warfare. It was a delicate balance, like walking a tightrope over a pit of hungry wolves. One misstep, and it was back to swords and arrows. The financial strain of these military endeavors was significant. The empire's treasury often resembled a sieve, the costs of maintaining such a vast territory leaking through every crack. The constant need for soldiers, supplies, and fortifications meant that taxes were a necessary evil, even when they were as popular as a root canal. The average farmer, already struggling to make ends meet, often found himself squeezed tighter than a lemon at a lemonade stand. And yet, for all the strain, the cultural exchanges that the Silk Road facilitated were nothing short of revolutionary. Buddhism made its way into China along these trade routes, forever altering the spiritual landscape of the Middle Kingdom. It was like importing a new operating system for the empire's soul, complete with all the updates and patches needed for a more enlightened perspective. Art, science, and technology flowed along the Silk Road, enriching Chinese society in ways that would have seemed unimaginable just a few generations earlier. In the grand tapestry of history, the Han Dynasty's expansion was both a glorious achievement and a cautionary tale. The empire's reach was vast, but it came at a cost that couldn't always be measured in silver and silk. The constant military skirmishes and the diplomatic juggling act with the Xiongnu were reminders that even the most successful expansion has its limits. The Han Dynasty may have been the ancient world's influencer, but it was also a reminder that influence, like all things, comes with responsibilities. As we move forward in this historical saga, it becomes clear that the Han Dynasty's story is one of ambition tempered by reality. It's a tale where the romance of conquest is interwoven with the grit of economic and political challenges. The Silk Road was more than just a trade route. It was a symbol of the Han Dynasty's ability to adapt and thrive in a world that was as unpredictable as it was interconnected. And in the end, it's these complexities and contradictions that make the Han Dynasty not just a chapter in history, but a story worth telling. As the Han Dynasty continued its epic saga of ambition and adversity, it was a time when the ancient world seemed to hit its stride in the innovation department. If you thought the ancient Chinese were just sitting around in their silk robes, sipping tea, think again. They were busy inventing things that would change the course of history, like paper-making, which popped onto the scene around 105 AD under the watchful eye of Kai Lan, a eunuch in the imperial court. Yes, a eunuch, because who better to bring forth one of the greatest inventions than someone who's already had their own personal revolution? Now, paper-making wasn't about crafting fancy stationery for penning love letters. It was a game-changer, like the smartphone of its day, revolutionizing communication, record-keeping, and education. Kai Lun's method involved mashing up a mix of mulberry bark, hemp, and fishnets. Yes, fishnets. Talk about recycling. To create a medium that was more effective than the bamboo and silk previously used. This wasn't just a craft project. It was the inception of a knowledge explosion. It allowed for a dissemination of ideas that was faster than a rumor in a small town. And then there was the seismograph, an invention that sounds like it belongs in a sci-fi movie, but was actually dreamed up by Zhang Heng around 132 AD. This wasn't your average earthquake detector. It was a bronze contraption with dragons and toads that looked like it could have been designed by a steampunk enthusiast. 8 dragons, each holding a bronze ball in its mouth, were arranged in a circle. When an earthquake struck, a ball would drop from a dragon's mouth to a toad below, indicating the direction of the tremor. Sure, it sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but it was accurate enough to alert the Empire to distant quakes, proving that the ancients knew a thing or two about early warning systems. It was like a pre-modern version of, hey, heads up, something's shaking. Of course, while these technological marvels were making waves, the social fabric of Han society was being woven with threads both revolutionary and restrictive. On the surface, Confucian ideals painted a picture of harmony and order. The reality, more like a stage play where everyone had a script, but not necessarily a happy ending. Women, for instance, were often relegated to roles that would make a 1950s housewife nod sympathetically. Confucianism placed them firmly in the private sphere, their worth measured by their ability to produce heirs and maintain a peaceful household. But let's not underestimate them. Han women had a knack for navigating these limitations with all the subtlety of a chess grandmaster. Take Ban Zhao, for instance, the sister of the famed historian Ban Gu. She was a scholar in her own right, penning Lessons for Women, a text that laid out Confucian teachings for women, but with a twist. It was pragmatic, advising women to be educated and resourceful, because who says you can't work the system from within? Ban Zhao's work was like a masterclass in subversion, wrapped in the respectable guise of traditional values. She knew that knowledge was power, and she made sure her words resonated with generations of women who would read between the lines. Yet, for all the talk of harmony, Han society was riddled with contradictions. The class divide was as stark as a black and white film, with aristocrats living lives of opulence while peasants toiled in the fields. The Han dynasty's prosperity often came on the backs of those who worked the land, their labor as undervalued as a forgotten heirloom. Taxes were a constant burden, and while the elite enjoyed the luxury of silk and porcelain, the average farmer struggled to keep his head above water, especially when natural calamities struck. And let's not forget the societal pressures that came with Confucianism's ideal of filial piety. Being a good son or daughter wasn't just about sending a card on Mother's Day. It was a lifetime commitment, often at the expense of personal freedom. The pressure to uphold family honor could be as suffocating as a tightly laced corset, and deviation from these norms was about as acceptable as showing up to a formal dinner in your pajamas. So, while the Han Dynasty is often romanticized as a golden age of unity and progress, the truth was more nuanced, a blend of innovation and inequality, of brilliance and burden. This was a society that could invent the seismograph and paper, but still struggled with the age-old issues of class and gender inequality. It's a reminder that even the most advanced societies have their shadows, lurking behind the veneer of prosperity. As we delve deeper into the Han Dynasty's legacy, it's clear that its story is far from over. The innovations and societal changes set the stage for future generations, leaving an indelible mark on history. And while the empire may have eventually crumbled, its contributions to technology, culture, and society continue to resonate, proving that even in the ancient world, change was the only constant. As we prepare to explore the final chapters of this remarkable era, let's keep in mind that history, much like life, is an intricate dance between triumph and tribulation, with a rhythm all its own. As we gear up for the grand finale of the Han Dynasty's epic saga, it's crucial to remember that history doesn't wrap up neatly like the ending of a feel-good movie. Nope, this is more like the season finale of a complex drama series, complete with cliffhangers, plot twists, and a cast of characters whose motivations are as murky as a swamp. Let's dive into the late Han period, where the empire that once stretched its borders like an overconfident rubber band started to snap under the pressure. By the 2nd century AD, things were unraveling faster than an old sweater caught on a nail. The Han Dynasty's decline was less of a dramatic collapse and more of a slow-motion train wreck, powered by internal corruption and external pressures that would give any crisis manager nightmares. Corruption, that ever-present spectre of political decay, had seeped into the Han court like water through a leaky roof. The eunuchs, those palace insiders with a monopoly on whispers and secrets, were playing power games worthy of a reality TV show. They wielded influence like a double-edged sword, cutting deals and lining their pockets while the empire crumbled around them. As for the emperors, they were often more figurehead than formidable, their authority undermined by palace intrigue and the whims of their inner circle. Then there was the small matter of the Yellow Turban Rebellion in 184 AD. Led by the Zhang brothers, this was no minor skirmish. It was a full-blown, peasant-fueled uprising that shook the empire to its core. At its heart, the rebellion was about desperation and disillusionment. The peasants, crushed under taxes as heavy as an ox cart, saw little of the empire's prosperity trickling down to their fields. The Zhang brothers, with their promises of utopian great peace, tapped into this frustration, like striking oil in the desert. The rebellion spread faster than gossip in a small town, and though it was eventually quashed, the damage was done. It was a sign that the empire's foundations were more unstable than a Jenga tower in a windstorm. The aftermath of the rebellion left the Han Dynasty more fragmented than a jigsaw puzzle, missing a few key pieces. Warlords began carving up the empire like a holiday turkey, each eager to claim a slice for themselves. This period, known as the Three Kingdoms, turned China into a chessboard of conflict and chaos. Picture it: Cao Cao in the north, Sun Quan in the south, and Liu Bei in the west, each with ambitions as grand as their armies were vast. This wasn't just a political reshuffle. It was a battle royale with the fate of the empire at stake. By 220 AD, the Han Dynasty's expiration date had finally arrived. The last emperor, a mere puppet on the stage of history, abdicated, marking the official end of a dynasty that had ruled for over 4 centuries. The empire's once grand edifice had crumbled, leaving behind a landscape of warlords and warring states, each vying for control in a game with stakes higher than the Great Wall. So what does this all mean for the legacy of the Han Dynasty? Well, it's a testament to the dual nature of history itself. On one hand, the Han era is often romanticized as a golden age, an era of cultural flowering, economic prosperity, and technological innovation. Paper, the seismograph, and the Silk Road were tangible legacies that shaped not just China, but the world. These innovations were like seeds, planted in the fertile soil of history, growing into mighty trees whose branches reached far beyond their roots. Yet, the Han Dynasty's legacy is also a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked power and the fragility of empires. The romantic narrative glosses over the harsh realities of class divide, corruption, and the unsustainable burdens placed on the peasantry. It's a reminder that even the most glittering of golden ages have their shadows, dark corners where the struggles of everyday people played out away from the gilded halls of power. In the end, the Han Dynasty's story is a tapestry woven from both legend and reality. It's a saga of ambition and hubris, innovation and inequity, triumph and tragedy. As we close this chapter, we're left with a reminder that history is never just one story. It's a mosaic of human experience, each piece reflecting the complexities of our shared past. The Han Dynasty may have fallen, but its impact endures, echoing through the corridors of time like a familiar refrain, a melody of both romance and reality, played out on the grand stage of history.